Does it? George Carlin. Working? Nice. Meeting.
Okay, good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is the Marion City Council work session for Tuesday, March 1st, 2022. Thank you for my badge. After 9 years, I'm finally official. Okay, the first item on our agenda, we're going to switch the first two items. So we'll do the life-saving award first, I think, and then go to the presentations. Is that okay? All right, so Chief, take it away.
Good afternoon. These are in conjunction with the ones that we had a couple of weeks ago from the Anytime Fitness. If you remember seeing the video that they showed at the time, these were the two officers that arrived right after the call came out and helped administer CPR until the paramedics arrived. So on January 17th, 2022, Officers Spencer Hartman and Corey Ryan responded to a medical call at a local gym. They found the gym manager performing CPR on a 65-year-old gym patron who had collapsed from a heart attack. The officers took turns administering CPR until paramedics arrived and administered a shock to bring his heart back into rhythm. The quick actions by the officers, gym employee, and the paramedics saved the man's life. Again, I had these written out at that time and was trying to save these so we could do multiple ones at one time. And then the fire department and the gym owner had brought up the gym manager. So that's on me for not getting them all at the same time. Plus, I didn't really want to steal the gym manager's thunder because that was good work. But not to take anything away from these guys. Spencer Hartman, this is his second one since I've been here. He's had one on the fireworks individual about a year and a half ago. Corey Ryan set the bar pretty high. He just started in December. He's a lateral transfer from Lynn County. So we're expecting big things out of him now. So let me get these. This one's for Corey Ryan. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Good job.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's good to know that our city is in good hands. Thank you, Chief. All right. Now we have an update regarding the Broad and Main project with Mr. Kittrell. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Afternoon, everybody. It's wonderful to be here, actually in person. It's wonderful to be here on what almost feels like an Iowa spring day. So happy to give a status report on what's been going on. I guess what, just about a block, just about to the northwest of here. We're going to try real hard to make the video work here. So Terrell, help me out here. So just to remind everybody, and I think Ms. Metzler, we're new, so I've got to try and fill you in here, and I'm not trying to bore everybody else, but I want to try and cover all the ground as best I can. So just to remind everybody, a couple of years ago, actually, we started working with Mayor Nick and Medco and on the idea of an uptown, improving your uptown area. And we are, by the way, a developer from Cedar Falls. So had been very much doing the same kind of work in the Cedar Falls area. came down and really with a lot of input, and we appreciate it very much, put together a vision for how we would hopefully make an impact on your uptown area. And we really saw it as a cultural and entertainment destination, truly a new heart for Marion. You've got a lot of growth happening, obviously, in your community. We're happy to help make it more of a destination. We certainly see the activity that's already down there with a number of the musical events and other things that are going on down there. You've got a very busy Main Street that's going on as well. And so we really wanted to add to that. Kind of these days, the more contemporary downtowns are really also having a lot of residential uses that are into there, and we wanted to expand those as long as some additional retail and commercial in the area. So the Marion Plaza was the first project that we started to work on, and we'll be talking about what we call Broad Main today. So that's a historical part. Move to the next one. I'm going to try and run through these really quickly, and if there's questions that you have, please feel free to hop in as you want to on it. I just want to answer 3 questions if I can really quick. Number one is, who are we? Who are the development team that's working on this? And I would emphasize right now and want to make sure that I emphasize all the way through this. This is the private side of this. We've had a tremendous amount of support from obviously engineering and planning and Medco and any number of staff, finance positions inside of the city of Marion. Tremendous work, and I'm going to continue to sort of go through that. In fact, we did put a little video together because we're so proud of kind of all of the work that we've done on this partnership. Tom, I hope you don't turn red on it. We'll see how this goes. So. Second of all is I want to answer questions on the plan that we presented a couple of years ago. I can't believe it's 2020 that we're talking about. It seems like COVID, we all lost a year in the middle of it. I want to fill in on where we are on status of that and talk about sort of where the partnership goes and what next steps look like. Let's go to the next one. So one more. There we go. So the partner that you're working with, I represent Eagle View. We are the development lead on the project. We are based in Cedar Falls, and it's honestly, my daughter and I are the 2 principals of the organization. We've done, and I think a number of you with the council came and did a visit to Cedar Falls to get a sense of what we've done up there. We're, I think, on our 9th project in Cedar Falls and hope to do many more in Marion as well. We teamed up on this project with a DCI group, which is a construction manager from Des Moines that we work with on many occasions. And obviously most all of the construction work is being done with local firms and local materials. And we did team up with a local development or a local architect, Shive Hattery, whom I know you guys work with and are quite familiar with. Go to the next one. So we started out, and I think honestly what really attracted us to the uptown area was really the opportunity. There's some great historical, I guess I would say, things that we really are looking to pay homage to. Broad and Main, I think, has a historical context that are there. We actually have saved some boulders and some of the original keystones from projects that have been there in the past. And my daughter really liked the name and has sort of picked up on that. So we're really calling the neighborhood the Broad and Main neighborhood. Go to the next one. In the original the uptown redevelopment plan that you put together, and by the way, great planning. I think a lot of work and a lot of community input went into it. It was really, I think, what allowed us to hit the ground running so well on it. As we really walked around the uptown area, we zoomed in on what I'll call the center of it. And we really have a philosophy in development that says you really do this kind of work 1 block at a time. And we're really looking at it that way. We've obviously had a pretty, I guess I'll say, intense impact on a block or 2 of the uptown. And one of the things I'd like to do is answer questions on that. We always want to try and minimize as much as we can the impact of those kind of development activities, but it was intensely focused really with this one. Next one. So we originally, as we looked at the center being the plaza or kind of the historic town center, town square, that's just to the northwest of here, we really looked at that and we really said the 2 sites that we thought would make the first initial impact and really start to change the tide would be the the block directly to the east, which was the original Marion Plaza, built in the 1960s sort of strip mall. And then obviously we were aware that the Marion Public Library was going through a new, pretty big expansion process. And we really started to think about the programming of those as well. Those are the two that I'm really going to be presenting status on today. We do have obviously other properties that I think are interesting in Uptown, and I'm sure us or other developers will sort of find the energy, and you'll start to see more activity from it. Let's go to the next one. So if you'll recall, a couple of years ago when we started this process, we really started with some conceptual ideas, and we are not very creative sometimes as developers. We came up with MU1 as the designation for it. It's now called Broad and Main 7. And that really is, we have Broad and Main on the 7th Avenue and Broad and Main on 6th Avenue that we're really working on. And Broad and Main 7, the one that's here, is actually the one that you see in construction today. So the green areas of this represent essentially a commercial retail area. The red areas are about 40 residential units that go on the top of that building as well. And you can see it's situated on a site where there's parking in the middle and adjacent essentially to the plaza or the original square in the downtown or the uptown area. Next slide. Here's starting to actually put some faces with some names. And if you go over there today, you'll start to see the bones of this being built today. But we really, again, are quite proud of the way that this is coming together, and you'll start to see actually brick going up now. We had a bunch of energy and time that we put into making sure that the brick had a good. It's hard to build old buildings when you're building new buildings. We really wanted to try and find a way that it would blend in with the great historical stock of buildings that you have there. So we're working on a kind of a varied brick pattern, a little bit of banding in it, and got a lot of input. We really almost are looking like a historical warehouse that might have been, for example, next to the train tracks is kind of what we were thinking about. Next slide. We're very far along in the construction actually on that, and I would be happy to answer questions about where that actually is. We plan on having it done in August of this year. So our hope is that we would actually start having people living and working in the building probably by September. And you can start to see some of the current activity that we're working on. The left-hand piece is an example of what some of the residential units and finishes would look like. See, it's a very contemporary look, the kind of thing that we think will be very attractive to young professionals who are considering moving to Marion and the Cedar Rapids market. You can see in the top right, we're actually starting to think about how do we build, we're calling it a beer hall or beer garden, a big food and beverage sort of destination that would be really next door to the plaza and really connect to the plaza. And there is some office work that we're doing on the second floor for one of your compatriot organizations. Medco will be taking space on there as well. So we're very busy in these kind of areas and planning for that activity. Go ahead. This will show you the reality, and it's always easy to show you the renderings and you wonder, okay, how are things actually coming? I think this is last week or 2 weeks ago, so you'll probably find a roof on it today, and hopefully before the next snow comes, we'll have all of that done. Storefront glass is going in, the rough in, mechanical HVAC and related is in, and like I said, we're at this point, as of this morning, we're on track and on budget, which, giving all what we've been through in the last couple of years, is pretty impressive. I'm very pleased with the work our team has done. Go to the next one. So the next building that we will do, and we're sequencing actually into it, on the back, the Broad and Main on 6th Avenue project will be an all residential property. So you'll notice instead of the green down below, being retail and commercial space on the BM6 building, it's gray as actually be structured parking. So for those units, there will be, it's not really underground parking because there's a pretty good grade to the site, but essentially there will be a parking garage that goes underneath of there and another 40 units. So we'll be north of 80 residential units here. This property, go to the next slide if you would. I wanted to start to expand out your vision a little bit. You can start to see the back of it. I didn't have as good a renderings as I really wanted to look at, but you can start to see how the neighborhood is going to form together. That'll be directly across the library. And like I said, probably slightly different. There are little bigger units that are in there. There's a fitness center that'll be in there, some more common space on it. It'll be more, I guess I would say, skewed to a little older demographic for that one as well. I really wanted to put this slide up because you can really start to see now the streetscape work that's starting to come along. I spoke earlier of the 7th Avenue work that's been going on. It was a busy year last year, and I wanted to mostly thank everybody, I think, in the community for, I know it's a lot of intense work to sort of get all of that done. But the last thing that we really want to do is have to come up afterwards and really tear it up and, put things back in again as well. So I think we've really done the work that we needed to, and it's really fun. I happened to drive through on 7th Avenue today, and with the building coming in on it, it really does start to feel like an urban center, which is, I think, all of our goal. For the next one. So my job is development. So I'm really the one who's leading the charge ahead of this. I'm probably the planner, the Tom equivalent in your organization here. And I'm really now turning my attention from the BM6 building into the public library, what we called the MU2 building overall on it. And the original plan that we had talked about and are still, I guess I would say, executing towards would be there would be a sister property to the one that is in construction now. So it would be a mixed use property. Again, you'll notice the retail on the first floor. And then residential units up above that one as well, but probably a 3 or 4 story property again, right on the southern border of the plaza area. Am I calling it plaza? Is that the right name to call it? I want to make sure that that's the right thing. So, okay, let's go to the next one if we can. And then after quite a lot of feedback from the community and from the first couple of times that we were in front of your group and talking with staff, we're also thinking about adding less dense, I'll call them townhouse or kind of the missing middle homes that it seems like people are very interested in, probably more again aimed at the maybe 50 to 70-year-old crowd, the people who are downsizers or sunbirds or snowbirds or whatever you want to call folks. We've had that's actually been our biggest growth area in our development in Cedar Falls, and people are interested in keeping a presence here in Iowa. And I think honestly, we want them to keep a good presence here as well. So this is as planned as an area that just sort of causes a nice transition into the single family neighborhoods that would be just to the south. Go to the next one. So I'd said also at the top, and I'll wrap up my comments by again thanking our team. We really, the private-public partnership is something that gets talked about a lot, but I'm not sure that everybody pays enough, I guess, appreciation for it. Go to the next slide, if we will. We really, when we came here to Marion, we really wanted to make sure that we had good cooperation and we were listening intensely with city government. We've met Brooke and the Main Street organization. We've obviously worked with Nick and Medco a lot. We've worked with engineer, thank you, Mike, and planning, Tom, and Ryan, and any number of other folks as well. So we really want to thank those folks for the input and the guidance that we're getting overall on it. Go to the next one. Where we are today with that project is we've really, I feel like, moved out of the first step where we're executing on the broad and main phase 1, phase 2 kinds of activity. And we're really trying to coordinate now with the end of your public library project and essentially what happens next with the site that's directly adjacent to the west. We also know that there's a ton of work going on your plaza project, and we're trying very much to coordinate with the public renovations or improvements that might be happening streetscape plaza along to the side. At this point in time, I would tell you, we have put together a development agreement that is pretty much identical to what we did with the Marion Plaza project. We worked extraordinarily hard with this team to put together a structure that worked for the community, a structure that the bank could get its head around so that they could provide the financing. And I think it really allowed the project to proceed, and we've done very well with it. That structure is exactly what we would want to use, or at least suggest that we use in moving ahead into the Marion Public Library project. So we've submitted that development agreement, and honestly, it's cut and paste from that original agreement. We spent about $200,000 collectively on legal and planning assistance on that. So why reinvent the wheel is kind of our thought at this point in time. So as you are moving ahead and having your own talks and doing your own planning on what would happen with that site, I thought we felt this was the right time to come back and show you that we not only are executing on the work that we've done, and hopefully in a way that you are satisfied with. I think it'll be, it'll age well, it'll do well in the downtown. I think we're going to really have the impact that we're looking for, but we're also prepared to continue to work. And, we would love to have the opportunity to move forward. So I think that is all that we have, with the exception of we have one little video, and hopefully I'm not going to embarrass anybody on this, but we did put this together actually as a result of the work that we were doing. It's really been great to work with such a great staff and set of consultants. For the record, there's about 3 minutes missing on that. And I think Nick and Tom were the ones that chose the one that didn't have them in there. We're really, really proud of the work that this team has done. And actually, I think it's been submitted for a couple of national awards because the cooperation, and I think the impact has really been very gratifying. You don't get the chance to do these kind of projects all the time. And I think it's going to be a real lasting impression for impact in Marion. We're real pleased about it. So I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Mark. Questions? Steve, go ahead.
Not a question, Mark, but just a statement. Again, I first met you when we visited and looked at some of your projects up there in Cedar Falls.
Yep.
We were certainly impressed with what you did there. And when I have an association with a new individual or a new firm such as yours, the most important thing I look at is their say-do ratio. In other words, did they do what they said they were going to do when they said they were going to do it? And so far, you have done that.
Yep.
To me, that's what I've been impressed with. And again, we're glad to have you here. Love to see the status of your project and how it's moving along. Thank you.
Thank you. I try and present these exactly that way so that you see what I said and then hopefully what we do for exactly that reason. Thank you.
Grant?
Yes, so I was a late joiner to council, and I think you were already pretty well in motion with your project. And I remember as I came up to speed, not only with the Broad Main undertaking, but streetscape. I remember thinking, you want to do what in parallel? All at once? So I have to say, congratulations to the team, because it's been a complex and interrelated set of activities. And if any measure of what's been done here over the last year and a half is testament for what is in your mind at this point, I would just expect to see kind of a repeat of some success. So thank you so much for that.
You know, and I wanted to make sure that I said that over and over through this presentation, because everybody talks about the cooperation between consultants and I mean, all the contractors and subcontractors and things that are involved in it. And people talk about, we need to do more of that collaboration and cooperation to make things work. It's happened on this project. I can't honestly say that I've ever had a better experience with a project. And I think a lot of it's credit to your team.
Other questions? Well, I'm glad that we have met your expectations in terms of, because when we're out selling a vision,
Yep.
you know, I'm glad that we were able to live up to the vision, and we appreciate you reaching higher with us and you being part of what we're doing here. It's really exciting, and
Thank you. Well,
Yeah,
we'll
thank
be back, I'm sure, again next year and have some more things to continue to talk to you about. As I said, I think at your convenience, I know you're wrapping things up with, I think the public library project is due
Yep.
here and about now, right? If I remember it right, wasn't it? I kind of remember May or March or something.
moving
like that.
target, but it's
Moving target. They always
We're
are.
getting
I
there.
get it.
We're getting there.
Yeah, but we're certainly prepared to move ahead when you guys are ready. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Mhm.
Okay. Our next presentation is from the Marion Chamber of Commerce. We have Tammy with us.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Tammy Schlamp with the Marion Chamber. As Mr. Kidroll alluded to, it was a busy construction season last year. But one of the positives of that is the possibilities of what we can do with our special events. So I wanted to come today and just share what our plan is. Because this is new, the first event that we will really come upon will be the Uptown Marion Market, which is on your agenda today. So I just wanted to present what our plan is for market and how that will fit in with construction and the new festival style street on 7th Avenue, and answer any questions that you might have. So up on your screen right now is our tentative plan on how we will do market going forward for this year, which, because we still have some construction going along on the west side of the park, we are planning to actually place vendors up on 7th Avenue, close the street for the morning, and put those vendors along the road. You'll see there are 16 right in front of the park, and then another 8 in front of the Broad and Main project. Those 8 will have access to their vehicles. The rest will drive in, drop their setup, and then relocate their vehicles. There's a gap in between those 16 north of the park, so that we can allow for pedestrian traffic to move really easily into the park, where we will place programming, kids activities, bubbles, booths such as you guys participate in when you come to market, as well as have room for overflow for vendors. Is there any questions? Do you guys have any questions about that? We're really excited about the possibility of being able to use 7th Avenue. If you recall, prior to COVID and a normal market season, we would have closed 6th Avenue and placed vendors down there. So this is really a flip-flop now that we have the ability. And we're excited because we think it's gonna be really good for the businesses in the uptown to have people a little bit closer rather than forced to the south of the park.
Okay,
All right.
anything else before we
Nope.
take questions?
Yeah, do you have questions
Questions?
about what that'll look like? And it's fluid, it's changing and it'll probably change throughout the summer. So
Colette has a question.
Super exciting. I can't wait. Can you tell us in comparison to the number of vendors we had in the past, is this more or less or the same?
sure. I keep saying normal. Let's go back to 2019. What our vendor numbers look like were anywhere between 45 and 50. Fast forward through COVID, and last year when we were in the parking lot, we were at about 25. So right now we're set up to have 24 on street and be able to add to the park. And with the way our applications are looking already, we already have well over 25 applications in. So I am thinking that we will be using that overflow into the park.
So there won't be vendors on 10th Street like you had before.
Not this year,
Yeah.
just because applications and that information all came out the beginning of February, and not knowing what the current construction schedule will be. What I don't want to do is have to change the plan with the vendors and how they set up and how they come in and out throughout the year. So it was just easier to make a plan to stick with. But yeah, in the future, when we have access to 10th Street back, there's the possibility of going back to the original setup. Although what we learned during the pandemic is that vendors and us as volunteers like it a lot easier when they can just drive right in, unload, without having to carry their stuff clear into the park. Some will have to do that.
It'll be interesting to see how it all works. I think it's exciting.
Yeah.
Should be, it's going to be really neat to see how the visitors to the market interact with the businesses that are stationary businesses in uptown, and integrating all of that. And I think it's gonna be really great. So
Thank you. We think
good
so too.
work. You
All
guys
right.
do a great job. Thank
Thanks.
you.
No other questions? All right. Hope to see you all there.
Thanks, Tammy. Okay, on the consent agenda, no items are marked prior to A7. Are there any questions on A1 through A6? Not, we'll move on to A7.
This resolution is the first step in the process for the general obligation bond issuance. We are in the process of planning for this issuance. What I'd like to highlight this evening are the projects for which we would be bonding for. The sidewalk ramp program project, which is at the budgeted amount of $140,000. The library building project is the big one for this issuance. We were originally budgeted $3.5 million last year, $3.5 million this year, for a total of $7 million. However, with the way things have played out with the old library site, the 1095 6th Avenue site, the original plan was contemplated to have $3 million in revenue from the sale of that site. And that has not come to fruition as of today. And so as the project is nearing completion, we're going to need revenue in order to pay the bills. So we are proposing in this issuance that we do bond an additional $3 million for that project to fill that funding gap. The fire station number 3 remodel is actually being delayed. So we are not going to bond as was intended in the budget for that project yet. The Lau Park roadway project, we actually bonded for last spring. This is kind of the fun thing of trying to balance cash flow and timing when your fiscal year is in the middle, fiscal year ending is in the middle of construction season. So I believe that project is kicking off this spring. 7th Avenue improvements project was originally budgeted at 2.3 million. for this year in issuance, we are looking at 3.665. This again is another cash flow timing. We're not increasing the plan in the amount that we're borrowing. It's just the timing of when we're spacing the borrowing out so that the cash flows are there when we need to pay the bills. Uptown sidewalk ramp and pavement replacement is as budgeted at 70,000. Hannah Park and Prairie Hill Park Development are projects that are budgeted for fiscal year 2023 and were originally planned to be included in the issuance next spring. However, I believe they are proceeding with the projects during this summer. So it's again, just a timing issue. And then the issuance costs are an estimate, of course. Are there any questions? This public hearing just simply sets the maximum, or the hearing notice sets the maximum. City council can choose to decrease the number in the future. And I did share in your packet very preliminary debt capacity analysis. So this is, of course, within our policy limit. And that's a very conservative one. We are still working on honing in on those numbers, and a very preliminary debt service analysis. Any questions?
I have two. What do you expect the duration of this bond to be?
I think we're looking at 20 years right now, and I will have full structure details available. Our financial advisor actually was on vacation last week, so I was still reviewing structure.
So when we get in the money from the sale of the old library, is there an opportunity to apply that as an early payment without penalty?
My
So that we don't have to be incurring the cost for 20 years?
My recommendation would actually be to lower the next issuance. We could use that 3 million in proceeds and decrease the amount borrowed.
Okay, just we'll keep the cash and use that for the next issuance.
Correct.
All right. Thanks.
Anyone else? Go ahead.
So I'm not a numbers budget guy, so wasn't correct. I'm trying to remember in the past when we've discussed going over $10 million for a bond, was there some type of,
You're thinking of bank
Penalty.
qualification. If you're under 10 million in a year, so all of your issuances for a year, you can get a bank qualified, which means basically a better interest rate, slightly better interest rate.
you're under?
And once you hit 10 million, you're no longer bank qualified. So most larger organizations, and as the city grows and we will borrow more money, it's very likely we'll hit a point where we just won't see bank
Don't do that
qualification
anymore?
again.
Okay. Thank you. I'm trying to remember what that was and.
Yep.
Thanks.
Other questions? Okay. Thanks, Leanne. Any questions on A8? All right, A9?
A9 is an administrative item. Synergy Equity Partners has sold the building that we have a TIF agreement in place for. And so they are requesting that we assign that agreement to the new owner.
And no concerns with that from staff?
No. Doesn't change any of the numbers or any of the content.
Okay. Any questions? All right, the remainder of page 3 and 4. No items are marked. Any questions on any of those? I guess through the end of the consent agenda, there's no items are marked. So anything else on the consent agenda? Both sets of consent agendas? Any questions in particular? Okay. On to the regular agenda. Item C1 under public safety. Chief, is that you?
Yes, sir. Thank you. I know we had the officers in here in the back of the room earlier. They were clapping when their partners got that life-saving award. If they were still here and they saw this thing coming through, they would be clapping even louder. This is a big step for us. We've been trying to separate ourselves from some of the animal control duties for a long time. I know it was an issue when I got here. And thank you, Mayor. The mayor kind of kicked this off. He had talked with some folks from Cedar Valley Humane Society at an event. They kind of threw an offer out to maybe engage with us in some discussions about a 28E. And so it brought us to this point. So thank you for getting the ball rolling. Basically, what I wanted to do is kind of give you the justification of the cost increase, kind of like what we talked about during the budget discussions. These up here, these are the basic numbers I can show you for like stray dogs. It's not cheap to have these animals picked up. And what we're looking at is basically essentially going from $40,000 a year to $52,000 a year. And there's some price points in here we can talk about. Carol, can you go to that next slide? So here's the big differences. Right now with Cedar Rapids, our contract's expired. It's been expired for a little bit over a year. We've been going month to month with them. They were waiting to get a new animal control director in place and haven't got that yet. And so they wouldn't enter into a new contract. We were happy with what we had, but I think this is a better fit for us and for the community. Again, right now we're paying $40,000 a year. They charge Marion residents $50 to drop a dog off down there. They accept animals only during the business hours at their facility. So their facility is located down by Kirkwood College. So normally what happens is people bring their dogs to the police department. And when that happens, we have to call an officer in, process the dog, put the dog into basically a cage. We've got some cages down in the basement. We've got a couple out and back. And then once a day, Cedar Rapids will come out and pick those animals up. If it happens to be late in the afternoon after Cedar Rapids has already made their run, the dog's there all day, or the cat is there all day until the next afternoon, which means we've got officers coming in feeding the dogs, trying to get them out of the cage occasionally. If some of them, when they've been out on the street a while, they have a little digestion issue. And so we have to frequently get them out of the cages, morse the cages out and things like that. So we've got, I think the other big advantage that we're going to see with Cedar Valley is right now in our contract with Cedar Rapids, we're on the hook for the first $350 worth of medical bills for a dog. So if we take a dog in, not knowing that the dog is sick or injured, they get the dog down there, they make that determination. It's up to them to take the dog to a vet. We're on the hook for the first $350, and then they call if it's going to be over 350, and then we decide what we're going to do. With Cedar Valley, they have their own on-site veterinarian. There's no extra cost for this through Cedar Valley. The advantage is we've had to turn people down. When we have a dog that's been hit by a car out on the road and somebody brings that dog to the police department and wants to surrender it, we tell them we can't take it because we look at that cost associated with caring for that dog. And then it's up to that individual to either take the dog to a veterinarian and get it treated before they take it down to the shelter themselves. So I think this is better for the community because they're going to take those sick and injured animals. There's no extra fee. Cedar Rapids, if we call them out, they don't chase dogs necessarily like what you would think in the old days with the guy with the net running around in a paddy wagon. We don't do that either, but if a dog is contained and we have to call Cedar Rapids out during business hours, it's an extra $35 an hour. So if we've got a dog contained in the backyard someplace, they come out, they charge us $35 an hour. If it's after normal business hours or the overnight hours, that goes up to $50 an hour for them to come out. It occasionally happens. It's not an everyday thing. But with this Cedar Valley 28E, there is no additional cost other than that $4,300 a month that we're going to be paying. There was a question from somebody in the community about the amount of money that people paid to get the dogs out. If you have a stray dog, if somebody finds your dog and takes it down there, under Cedar Rapids, they have an impound fee of $30 plus $20 a day in boarding. What we've been doing is if people go down to pick their dog up at Cedar Rapids and it came through our department, is they get sent back out to the PD, we call an officer in, we write a dog at large citation, which is $75. So you're looking roughly at $125 for them to get their dog back. Cedar Valley, it's going to be $80. It'll be $80 for the first day, $20 every day after that. And because we won't have to touch the dogs and we won't have anything to do with the strays, we can avoid the citations for the dog at large. So it's kind of a wash for the citizens on how much they have to pay to get their dogs back out. We will still end up dealing with vicious animals. They've got a place that they can quarantine animals. So generally speaking, if we have a dog bite and we have to quarantine an animal, if it doesn't have rabies shots on file, or if we think that that animal's too vicious to leave at the house, they will quarantine that animal down there for us. Again, no extra charge. I think overall, it's going to be a good program. They're going to allow residents from Marion to drop their animals off down there directly during the normal business hours. It's about 6 minutes south of the police department. It's when you go down to Mount Vernon Road and go left, it's about a quarter mile up the road on the right-hand side. So again, that takes that out. After hours, people will call us. We will have the number for the after hours person at Cedar Valley. We'll simply call them, say, hey, we've got somebody coming in with a dog, and then they will come in. We'll direct the resident down there, and the resident will meet the Cedar Valley employee down there, and they'll put the dog into their facility down there. So again, it's very hands-off for us. We're excited about it. I tried to get some data on the amount of time it takes. The slide before, it's roughly 81 animals a year that we could find that we're doing the shelter pickups there at the PD. If you figure roughly an hour for each one, in processing and out processing, you're looking at about an 80-hour work week for one officer. It's not a huge savings, but that opportunity cost, again, of what that officer could be doing if he didn't have to be in there. And again, I kind of go back to the thing I've been doing quite a bit is I'm trying to chip away at the stuff that maybe is not necessarily a police matter, so I can keep the cost down and keep the officers focused on doing police work. So I can answer any questions that you have.
Any questions? Yeah. Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, Chief, I think it might have been a year and a half ago now that we talked about, the general our approach to animal control. And you explained to me at that time, our work with Cedar Rapids. As I just think about this, number one is it takes you out of kind of a non-value added activity. But the other end of it is thinking about it from the standpoint of the critter involved. Cedar Valley Humane Society, I've done a little bit of very small amount of work with them over the last few years. And I mean, very clearly, they're really worried about the animal welfare. And so I think that's evidenced by the fact that the veterinarian is readily available. Any of those kinds of concerns can be taken care of. And obviously, if there's an owner who wants to recover them, there's a clear pathway for that. So this, I think, presents a very simple way to tell our constituency how this needs to work, what their involvement is, the whole structure about it. And that was part of the concern that I think you and I talked about. It was a little mysterious about how we were handling animals. And this really, I think, sharpens that up and takes a significant burden off of your department's shoulders. So I think this is great.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Will.
Couple questions. First, you keep saying dog. I assume this is for other animals too, cats.
Dogs and cats. Yes, sir. I'm
okay.
Biased with that.
No, yeah, no worries. And then maybe I missed it, but can you explain? You talked about how, like, if there's a dog that's loose and they come after hours or whenever they come down to help corral the dog, how's that going to work with Cedar Valley then?
Cedar Valley will come out. If we've got the dog corralled, they just don't charge us extra for it. So
They won't,
Cedar
okay.
Rapids charges 35 and 50 depending on the time of day. And that would also be for like a vicious dog. If we got a dog that we can't get into, say we need to get into a house and we've got a dog that just will not let us in rather than us tasing the dog or shooting it or something like that, they'll come out.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? I'm glad it worked out, Chief.
Yep, thank you.
I think the added cost is very minimal, considering the positive sentiment it creates with your team and the little bit of breathing room it gives you to be able to do what you're supposed to do, which is police work. So glad it worked. Okay, with that, we'll move on. Let's see, D1 is not marked. Any questions on D1? Under parks? Okay, engineering? D1.
Yes, sir. So on Thursday, we'll have a public hearing regarding the 2022 HMA resurfacing project. So we had one bid, LL Pelling. It did come in over engineer's estimate. We do have $1 million that is allocated towards this project. So just like the previous years, as we get that existing asphalt layer off, we will modify what we have to do. So if we have to take a street out, or if one street isn't as bad as we thought it was, once we figure out what's actually underneath that existing asphalt, we'll tailor the project so that we come in under budget. But we are recommending that we approve the contract that is over budget at this point.
Okay, questions? Okay, there are none. E3.
So this is also a public hearing that we'll have on Thursday regarding the Indian Creek Trail project. So this starts at the Donnelly Park Bridge that we built along Indian Creek up to Tower Terrace. So there were several bids that were received by the DOT. PCI was the low bid at $1,719,592.32. It has a start date of 3/21/22, which is in a hurry here by the time we get the contract in. 140 working days and $1,000 per day in liquidated damages. The reason for the late start date is there's a few trees that need to come down for the Indiana bat prior to, I believe it's April 1st.
Questions? Okay. Any questions for Mike on E5 before we move on to community development? All right, community development, F1 through F3 are not marked. Any questions on those? Okay, F4, Tom?
Yes, on Thursday, there'll be a public hearing regarding a preliminary site development plan for Green Park Apartments. The council is familiar with this project. This is the previous YMCA site. If you recall, we did go through a process and approve a preliminary and final site development plan back about a year ago, I believe, if that long, actually. They've brought back a revised preliminary site development plan and want to move forward to final as well. And what they've essentially done is kept the same number of units, so the density is the same. They've combined the two buildings that were on 31st Street into one building. They brought in the parking and put it underground. So it's, I believe it's a little bit taller. The area has more green space now because it's got reduced number of outside parking. And they've just made those modifications. We wanted to ensure that the neighborhood was kept informed. We asked the developers to submit those for review, and we took it back through Planning Commission. We renoticed it and went through the whole process to ensure that everybody was brought up to speed. The Planning Commission reviewed this and is supportive of the project, and we're moving it forward to council for a public hearing on Thursday, upon which there'll be the preliminary site development plan for the entire site, and then the final site development plan would be up for approval, and that would be the south building adjacent to 10th Avenue on the corner. They added a leasing office as well as a part of this, so it's separate from the other buildings. So I don't know if there's any specific questions on that.
Questions? Go ahead. Grant.
Yeah, is there minor changes to the exterior finishing of the buildings that they're proposing? I thought I noticed they had a slightly different look, but it wasn't radical in nature.
Correct. There were some slight changes. I believe I'd have to look at the specifics of it. But I believe they went with more of the brick work on the lower levels, and then they did it all around and even on the ends. So Was there a specific piece that you were referencing?
No, I guess really just wanting to confirm that I was looking at that right, that there was a change in the exterior.
And I think with the underground parking there, they get elevated, so that changes the elevation looks as well. Okay. I think it's important as they keep from a public perspective, the buildings are a little taller than the neighborhood, so they've kept them back off the property line. And they've put a landscape buffer between the street and the buildings specifically on the 31st Street side. So I think that helps in blending in with the neighborhood to the west and to the north.
So on that point, is that little greater setback with landscaping treatment a change from the original concept? I mean, that's.
I don't think there
valuable.
was as much landscaping. I can verify that.
The fact that they're doing it is good. So I just was,
Yeah.
I hadn't tuned in on that. Well, Tom, your answer anyway on the prior was, thanks. I appreciate that.
Yep.
Yes, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, what we're starting to see, I think, Tom, at least as a consistent pattern, for some of these larger apartment complexes with all under building parking. Mark just described one. We've got that out on the east side of town. They've transitioned or changed the third building on 31st to do that or to accommodate that as well. I mean, if I were looking for an apartment today, that's something I would look for as well, or definitely want for a number of reasons. So is that kind of becoming more the norm versus something that is unusual?
Well, I think there's a couple things that drive that. And this is Tom speaking just from what I'm seeing in the market, and that is the price per square foot for ground is going up. So parking gets more expensive. There's a bigger desire for green space. And so to combat that, you can put the parking in the building and then you got your green space and you don't have to buy as much property. I also think from a clientele perspective, there's become more of an expectation at the level of rents that are being expected, that there's underground secured out of the weather parking. So I think all of those just play into that market that we're seeing. And I think as we become a little bigger as a community, those expectations will just be there. I think similar to the design aesthetic, we're seeing a much, more prevalent design aesthetic added to the buildings as well.
Yeah, I'm assuming when they include that parking, that probably has to add $70 to $80 a month, something like that.
I would imagine. I think that would be a great question for the developer, and they may not. They will have a better perspective on the market than I will, but that's what I'm seeing, and I would agree. I believe they're going to get more. East Town Crossway or East Town out off 151, same deal. And I, from what I've heard, there's been no issues with rent and filling the buildings up. So from a market perspective, I think they're very marketable.
Yeah, I think it's certainly from the security standpoint and having your vehicle inside with an apartment, that is something 20, 30 years ago that just wasn't out there. It wasn't common at all. And now today, all of a sudden, it's becoming very prolific. So
won't be long. I think it'll just become an expectation, honestly.
Yeah, that's kind of moving in that direction. All right. Thanks.
Go ahead, Will, and then Sarah.
Comment on what Steve was saying real quick before I ask my question. My daughter was renting an apartment down in Iowa City a couple of years ago, and she was paying like $200 a month for indoor parking extra. So it was, it's expensive, or at least it's in Iowa City. The indoor parking on the new building on 31st, is that going to accommodate all the residents? So now just the exterior is for the outside parking is just for like guests?
I don't know right offhand, but I do believe it was one, and they're one per unit, and then
one stall per unit.
I could be wrong on that, but that's. Oh, here we go.
I do.
Building has 69 units with 65 interior parking stalls. So almost. Or short.
And comment on what Grant brought up too. I do think the exterior looks better in the new renderings than the previous. At least I like the look of it better.
I agree. What prompted them to do that with the additional brick? Yeah, it's a great addition.
You know, I didn't
So-
sit in on some of the initial meetings and I know that there's a lot of conversation when that building got taller. You know, it just, it's a question that gets asked to break up the facade. And that was just the response the developer had.
Yeah, I think that's very good. Sarah, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm looking at the different pictures and trying to get my bearings. So the buildings front the streets and the parking's behind and the green space is behind.
Correct. Yep.
Okay,
So as you look where it says building number 278 units, just on the other side, so if you go back into the screen, that would be 31st Street. And if you go, yeah, there you go.
so that's like where
got this
the
cool new
fields would have
toy.
been,
Maybe.
that second building.
Yeah, 31st Street, 10th Ave.
Uh-huh. It's a very busy.
Oh,
There
even
we go.
better. Yeah.
So those
Look at
front, okay.
that. It's really fancy.
And then the green space is behind, okay. So, and
This is fun.
modern technology at its best, right? Okay, so the building, the north side building, they both have parking underneath or just? the-
Yes.
They
Yep.
both have parking underneath. Have we heard anything more from the neighbors before the public hearing since the adjustments have been made? Have we had a lot of correspondence? Have people seen
You know,
this?
I believe there's been a few folks that have called in, and I think it was some of the same folks that had discussed it before.
Okay,
So I would expect on Thursday that there'd be the potential for folks here wanting to voice an opinion about the project.
and the main concern is just, it's a change from.
I know one of the comments was relative to light that would be brought with the new project, which is not uncommon. It's a dark field now, so there's not a lot of light. And when the Y was there, it was closed at night. I mean, obviously you're gonna have windows and such that will free up. It is nice that the parking will be screened by the buildings. So headlights are usually a major concern when you have a large building with a lot of limited access points into a neighborhood. So that one access point, you know, the driveway, I mean, you got to have access to your property. So that I believe was one of the concerns.
Sorry.
Okay, other questions? All right, thank you, Tom. So F8 through F10 are all related to that. No, I'm sorry, no, F8 through F10 are the next item. Any questions on those? No questions. What's it? We didn't do F7? Oh, I'm sorry. You're correct. That's what I meant. F7 is the item and then F8 through F10 are related to it. So F7. Thank you.
F7, we've talked about this project a couple times. It went through a rezoning process. I think at that time we had some preliminary graphics illustrating the proposed development. This is the property owned by Talon LLC, and they're seeking the preliminary site development plan for a 4-story 93-unit apartment building and 6 townhomes. And this property is the previously owned by the Hames family on Marion Boulevard. Just, I guess, east of Coffee Smiths would be a good explanation, or across from the bank there on the corner. The apartment building will include 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms, and some 3-bedroom units, a number of different amenities that we're seeing more often, dog park area, a playground, fitness center. This project is a workforce housing tax credit project, as was the other one. The Green Park project was also a workforce housing tax credit project. So they have some standards and such that they got to meet as a part of their project and their planning, which helps us as we walk down the road of working through development of the project as well. I think one of the concerns that the council had and has been a conversation that we've had. And I think the traffic study was attached for your review. For those that wanted to dig through that, there is a lengthy conversation about the access point, which I think is good. When you're talking about a busy roadway like Marion Boulevard, we want to make sure that the access is being provided and is appropriate. Engineering has reviewed that and they are supportive of the proposed site plan as it moves forward. We did send out notices to folks within 300 feet. And there's been a lot of conversation between the developer and the Kindles who live on the house just east of the property. So this is, I'll refer to it as the house on the hill. There's been a lot of conversations, as you guys can imagine. And if you looked at the plat, this is old railroad right away. There are a number of just stranded parcels and pieces that have kind of been put together over the years. There's never been a formal plat. So we're walking down the road of a preliminary and or a final platting process along with this property. So it's not really easy to go out and find your property pin or identify property lines. They've kind of morphed over the years, no questions about it. Access to the house on the hill is limited from the front, particularly in the winter. When I say the front, would be the south. You know, if you drive down Marion Boulevard, there's a steep incline. So there is an access road that kind of goes around the side, the west portion of the building or the lot, and then kind of curves around to the back side of where Keys Court is. Some of the site plans illustrated, it's kind of difficult to see. Upon surveying, it's been determined that there's some property upon which that drive of the house owned by the Kendalls, the house on the hill, is on the former Hames property site, so on the Eagle or on Talon's property. So we've asked them to kind of work together. We'd really like to get that resolved. It's a private matter between two property owners. So we've tried to just say, hey, it'd be great to get this figured out as we walk down this road and get these approvals in place, because the site plans are going to reflect where drives are and such, where landscaping will be located. We thought there was some situations worked out, but as I understand it, there's still some discrepancies between whose is what, and there's been no signed easement agreements as a part of this project, but we've reached back out and we're hoping that we can get some resolved before Thursday. But I will say that, and I bring this to light because I want to have a conversation with the legal department as well, because currently the final plats illustrate some easements that have not been signed. So before Thursday, we'll want to make sure that we have all of that kind of outlined. I do believe that the Kendalls will be here to present information regarding those easements and some questions that they have. And I don't believe that they're in supportive of some portions of the project. So I see that they would be here and probably voice some concerns in that regard. I would point out, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that from a legal perspective, they're private easements. If the individual shows the site plan and the site plan illustrates things on their property and the owner of the property to the east doesn't agree with that, we're in a position where I don't think we can hold the project up for a private property matter, but we certainly want to try and see it resolved. So I'll give an update on that on Thursday, but I just want the council to be aware of that situation. And it may come to a point where the conversation is had during the public hearing. And so I just wanted to alert the council of that situation. Moving on to the project though, as you can see, the building situated off the northwest side, parking's in the front. There's no underground parking being proposed on this site. There's a playground and a dog. It's called a dog park area, but it's for the residents, and it's an area where they can have their dogs run free without a leash. It's not identified for containment of animals over a lengthy period of time. I know that's been a position of the adjacent property owner, that they don't want to see that there. They're concerned with that issue. But as you've seen in the last one, there's a dog park at the Green Park Living, and that's become a much more prevalent situation with apartment buildings as well. The planning commission reviewed this at their meeting, and they did recommend approval. Their concern was that private easement agreement, and they made their approval contingent upon getting that taken care of. But I don't, like, as I said, I don't know if that can actually hold true to the end. I think the planning commission's thought was, let's get this thing outlined so that we get this taken care of as we move forward. The packet included renderings of the site. They are proposing a primary material of hardy board siding. And you can see we asked for some pretty specific illustrations. I know the council had some concerns with some of the elevations, and I think they supplied a letter identifying their desire to maintain the hardy board siding throughout the project, and for your reference. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Describe hardy board siding.
So it's cement, horizontal lap siding. So I don't want to, I'm going to
It's
say
cement.
It's yeah, cement board. So
Okay.
it's not vinyl.
Okay,
It's hard. But it looks like vinyl from the perspective. It's a horizontal siding.
because from the renderings, that's what it looks like vinyl, but yeah.
Yes, but it's a hardy board system. I believe that's what, well, no, it's not. Green, what's that? Oh, Terrace Glen on Albernet Road.
Okay,
So Green Park is an engineered wood, which is a highly compressed wood siding. And so it's not vinyl as well, but so, and I believe there's some Nietzsche hot panels associated with the entrance on the building as well.
questions, go ahead.
Yeah, so two comments. So does the hardy board siding require any exception, or is that one of the approved materials? I mean, they gave us a pretty extensive letter supporting the reasoning why they want that.
Yeah, so staff usually asks for a mix of materials.
Right.
We don't have requirements in place in this corridor right here
Okay,
currently, so there's no design standards in this. We did ask for a mixed material, so some stone. Their response was, this is how we want to proceed, and so therefore they did with the hardy board.
I mean, it does give I agree with Nick, it gives you the appearance, if you look at it, of vinyl siding like it would be on any residential house, but the makeup of the siding is exactly what they have in their letter. I mean, it's much more durable, extensive.
Yep.
Will maintain its color, won't fade, should not fade. Can stand up to hail and lots of other products. So I understand why they want to use it. And obviously they've used it in a lot of other of their projects.
Yep. Well, I do believe I will verify this before Thursday, and that is that when workforce housing tax credits, low and moderate income family, LMI projects, low income housing tax credit projects, senior projects, anything funded with the tax credits goes through that goes through the Green Streets program, which is a design standard process or a design standard established by the state. The state does allow, provides its hardy board as a permitted material. I do not believe that it allows vinyl, except for maybe a very, very minor percentage. And so that's why you see the projects that we've worked on that are tax credit projects have a more durable finish and mix of materials.
The other comment I have is in the traffic study, it mentioned 2 items for consideration for additional study, both related to the street and the traffic flow. One was the Marion Boulevard median. And then the second one was the Marion Boulevard at Twixt Town geometrics, as they call it. So I know we're going to be working on that road on Marion Boulevard. That's one of our projects this summer. Particularly, I agree with their comments on the Marion Boulevard and Twixt Town with that little center median there. I mean, I've come at that in different directions when you're actually wanting to approach from Town on the Marion Boulevard. That is very confusing, and for lots of people, it's been confusing for me in the past. So just maybe some comments about how we can consider or what we're going to do to take those considerations, or what we can do with those.
Yeah, so engineering staff has already started looking at that intersection, just using our maps. We've looked at different alternatives. Staff is actually going out there now that the snow is starting to melt and actually survey it to come up with actual numbers on how we can actually just eliminate that complete median.
Okay.
Then what happens is typically, as we have that and many other projects, we put that into the CIP for evaluation and scoring. If that's something that city council wants to prioritize and allocate funding, it's just a matter of what project then gets deallocated that funding. There is a possibility that with the NSI, local option sales tax money, that money may go towards that, similar to what it's going towards for the Marion Boulevard project. A lot of it depends on the numbers we get on a lot of those projects and utilizing that money as well as we can.
So I'm looking at it from a timing standpoint. I mean, if we're going to be working on the road in front and they're going to be starting to work on the construction of their project, if we're going to do it and it makes, and engineering recommends we do that, does it make sense if we can find the dollars to do it in the same timeframe?
Yeah, and that's why we're looking at it right now to even find out what that dollar amount is. So when we
Right.
got the traffic report, we looked at it as well. So anytime something like that comes to our attention, we're going to take a look at it and see.
Okay. Thanks.
So, anyone else? So Tom, you said we don't have design standards here, so we can't require anything more than this.
It's difficult. It is planned
Right.
development. I think it could be requested to the council, but I mean,
Okay.
it's a
What
difficult.
about colors? Can that,
I think those are questions that you can ask the developer and on Thursday at the public hearing. Absolutely.
okay, all right. Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead.
So engineering looked at this intersection on Marion Boulevard and does not foresee any, not intersection, but driveway. Not foresee issues with that, because that driveway location just right after a stop light seems dangerous to me. And obviously it's going to be a right in, right out only, correct? Because the median, okay.
Correct. It'll be a right in, right out. I mean, ideally, at one time they were looking at aligning it with the intersection, but that's not on their property. So then you're talking about property acquisition and moving. So, I mean, they are limited as to what they can do. We can't not give them access.
And there's no, it's more of a Tom question, no, the whole off of Keys Court type of thing is with, because the property's owned also, so it'd be more acquisition to get a driveway. Or is my question making sense?
Backside where I don't think they own all the way around. Is that what you're asking? So that they can
Right.
access the property?
Correct. There's access there now to get up to the neighbor's house,
Oh,
but they potentially could make access all the way from that development too onto Keys.
There's a detention pond back there.
yeah, I don't think they own.
Right, I know they don't, but I gotta find the picture. Yeah, maybe
I'm trying to do that same thing.
Maybe I was looking on my phone at the map, not at the packet. Because there's access now out of the parking lot. Or that's back there. And then a road that goes all the way over. I mean, it looks like you could drive all the way to Marion Boulevard or to Twixtown from Keys Court in the back.
I think that's how the house provides access. but I don't- Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm kind of questioning. Is there a way? So there's already a road there now. Whose road is that? Is there a way for them to have
I think that's
access
owned
there?
by whatever the Hames family ownership is. I don't think they own that. I think that access is providing access to that.
To the house.
And then also that
And
shopping.
Hames,
Yeah, yeah.
because if you look at an aerial view, which I'm looking at on here, it goes in back behind the Hames property, which are on the Hames property in the back of it.
Yeah, and I, you know, that they've not illustrated that. I don't think they have access across that property, but I think that's a question for them on Thursday. You know, why haven't you provided, or why are you not working towards that?
Seems to be, if they could get that access off of Keys, much safer access in my mind than right there at the stoplight.
Go ahead, Steve.
So to follow up on what Will's talking about, at that driveway, so I know that's gonna be a right in, right out only. So is there actually gonna then be a sign there that says right turn only? Where they're going out onto Marion Boulevard? Is there,
We'll have to look at it when it gets closer to that, and we typically try and do what we can as far as putting a center median in to try and deter that. Similar to, if you can think along 7th Avenue and Come and Go, trying to make that so it's very obvious that it's a right in, right out. Doesn't mean that people.
I'm trying to
always
even
obey
make it more obvious and,
Yeah.
you know,
So when
visual
we-
plus readable.
Yeah, so as we get more into the details and at
Okay,
the actual
down the road.
construction drawings, we'll
All
get
right.
into that stuff.
Fair enough.
Colette?
I think I have a question. I was trying to answer it before I'm asking, but so there's currently 2 exits, is that right? Or is there 3 exits?
There's currently two.
Okay, look at that fancy toy.
So one here,
Yep,
this is Twixtown Road, and the other one is here on Marion Boulevard.
and there isn't one then over to the right of that,
No,
right?
it's-
That's what we were talking, that's.
Yeah,
is
so
that
Will
what
was
you were
talking about having
Yeah,
some kind of connection back here
Right,
that is not there today.
which would be way better than coming off on Marion Boulevard, so. Thank you.
No, it goes south.
Yeah, through the detention.
No, it goes down. Not through that retention pond.
It's that angled piece.
You can see where it ends.
This thing's coming in handy tonight.
Yep.
Right here.
No, it's back further in front of the townhouses, isn't it? No, right in front of the townhouses, the road kind of goes down, there's parking and then it stops. I believe that's where the road goes south, or the access road goes down to Keys Court.
Yeah, I think
I don't know. that's
now that I look at
backwards.
it,
Cause
yeah, it's right in here, I believe. But they don't, it's not owned and there's an elevation change. Have you been back there?
no, I
It,
to drive. through.
yeah, it's not, and they don't have access to it. It's, I was just looking up the GIS and it's, and to their, and I think they will say this, once they do that access, they're gonna have responsibility for maintaining it. They're gonna have to secure the easement. There's a lot that goes into getting that access. So, you know, if they own the property, I think from the perspective of saying you need to provide that access, but for them not owning, it's difficult to require that they go acquire public easement across somebody else's property for that access point. If they can prove the access that they're of their own property can be provided within our standards. But if, I mean, obviously, if they couldn't do that, then that would be an option they could go explore. So I think it'd be difficult for us to say, you have to go find that access onto Keys Court.
Because an option already does exist.
Yeah, and then they've done everything we've asked them to do to ensure that it meets engineering standards. If we came back and Mike said, hey, you don't get any access, and they needed 2 ways of egress, then they would probably have to go look and say, is that back access available?
Okay.
I
So
understand where you're
Did that make sense from engineering as well? I just want to make sure.
well, I mean, we're relying on our experts here. If you all think that this works, it works.
Your Honor.
Go ahead.
So actually, on this same general topic of access into the property, Chief Crable, how does your department feel about an entry off of Twixtown as well as then a relatively adjacent entry off of Marion Boulevard?
it actually meets the code requirements. We sit down with engineering and planning when these plans come up. We actually have a committee. We sit down and we go through it and we look at the turning radius of the engines and all of that. And this does meet that at this time.
Okay, so an access essentially to the northeast of the property doesn't add any value to your concerns.
No, it does not.
Anything else? Okay. Under other department discussions, we have a presentation regarding Rookwood East development.
Can you go to the next slide, please? So I wanted to this project forward. The developer has asked me to represent it to the council before they proceed, just to provide some background and some before he moves forward with full preliminary plat of the property. Just concerned that he doesn't want to get down the road when there's been a process in place and have something not proceed in a certain manner that it makes him have to go back and re-engineer the project. So I want to back up a little bit, a few years. When the ALP was adopted, we moved forward. It was a desire to zone the airport. We moved through an adopted zoning in 2019. When we adopted that zoning, it established specific zones in and around the airport. The image on the left highlights those zones that were specific to the airport on the north side of 151, east of Squaw Creek Mobile Home Park. And I just use that because you can see that rather well in the illustration. So this is the mobile home park. This is 151. You can see that this is the end of the runway here. As you move out from the end of the runway, there's the red area, which is the RPZ. There's an approach zone that it continues out for a much larger or much greater length. And then around the approach zone, our transitional is called the transitional surface, which is another zone. So the zoning was in place when the area was being proposed to be developed and purchased. Staff met with the developer. We looked at the airport and the zoning and said, hey, before we get too far down the road and start entertaining development, what we really need to do is have a land use plan that takes a peek at the zoning, the land use plan, the ALP, the city's growth, and so on and so forth. And the developer was happy to sit in on them as a stakeholder. And we reached out to landowners north of the airport as well to ensure that they were a part of this process. And we really established a land use plan reflective of the zoning and the ALP and the city's future growth. The plan on the right is that land use plan. And I believe in your packet, you have the whole document you could have looked at. And then it lays out specific densities and land use designations throughout that. I think what is important to note in this particular situation is that the area, this is the RPZ, it's right at the end of the runway. As you go north, there is a specific area identified for no development or passive recreational area, but certainly was not being proposed to be developed to provide or encourage a high concentration of people consistent with general guidelines for land uses in that approach zone. RPZ is just, there's no development in the RPZ. That's right at the end of the runway. As you venture out, the transitional surfaces on the edge, you can see in this illustration, it just takes away the underlying land use and talks about uses that would be permitted in those areas. And it talks about density, and it shows some low density residential, as well as the outer ends of the approach zone showing some low density residential. But primarily, it's really trying to say you want commercial, industrial, something a lot less intensive where you don't have people, high concentrations of people. The biggest factor, and I think it's important to note that as you get closer to the runway, clearly you don't want any planes landing early or having issues taking off and landing. But as you get out a little bit further, it's really a noise issue. So a lot of the provisions regarding residential in the approach zones, it's relative to how loud the airport is. So, and I can send you all circulars, and I'm sure Grant's seen them, and Steve's probably taken a peek at them as well, on the studies that can be required to ensure that when you do residential development, that you're not doing it in areas where there's so many decibels associated with it. So you have to do noise studies and such that would provide that. We don't have the jet traffic, obviously, and it's a more general use airport. So we do have, when we worked with our airport consultants, this was the guidance that they provided to us. So we incorporated that in the land use plan, which was approved, I believe, in November. And so as you can see, there's been a lot of thought that has went into how this area is planned. We've got a land use plan that was adopted as a part of our guidance. We had the developer that was involved in that project, a stakeholder in this, so he's very aware of this situation. And he has done exactly what we expected, just based on who he is and how he develops. And if you, Terrell, if you can go back to the first slide. No. The developers has submitted the concept, and as you can see, and I know it's difficult to see, the concept is following right alongside the land use plan that's been provided. So where you see homes and lots, those are the densities that were spelled out specifically in the land use plan. And so he's proposing to bring forward a preliminary plat that illustrates that consistent with the land use plan. One point of conversation is this area here. If you go to the land use plan, if you can go back there to there's an area that's identified in the green, outlined by blue. This right here is a proposed regional detention basin. The developer is proposing to build that as a water feature, a man-made water feature, a regional basin. It would provide detention for that entire area. It's not proposed to fill up and then slowly dissipate. It's being proposed to hold water. As it relates to development in these areas, one concern, and there's FAA circular that identifies that wildlife attractants can be an issue. Our zoning actually requires a portion of this, which is right here, is in the transitional surface. Over here, it's considered compatible. In this area here, it's identified as additional review, which would require the zoning administrator, me, to provide guidance on whether that should go there or not. And so there's a process that we have to follow. So there is an FAA circular that says you should not put a water feature within 10,000 feet of the runway. Now, as you look at that guidance, it's usually, I'm going to generalize this, it's generally related to larger airports. We have a general use airports, and talking with our airport consultant, that is a local consideration that can be made. I do think, and as I've heard from a couple council members, we'll want some feedback from him as it relates to that guidance before we move forward. And I intend on getting that. But I want to bring this issue to light so that there's full clarity as we move forward, that this is one of the areas that the developer is saying, hey, I want to make sure before I design this, that there's some concurrency with the city council as we move it forward. So that's one topic I just want to bring up that I know we got to have some conversations about, and we'll seek some guidance before we move forward that from our airport consultant, which is Jerry Serrell with the HDR. The next item is, and I think it's important to note that we adopted the zoning before we did the land use plan and started looking at these specific uses and the layout of the project. One area that there's some conflict between the land use plan and the zoning, and it was brought up at the time we did the land use plan, and that is that in the approach zone, which is that this is the RPZ where there's no development, allowed. As you continue out, the approach goes well out past Furlong Road. I don't recall right off the top of my head what the distance is, but it is for quite a distance. Within that approach zone, that is a lot, there are some residential uses that are allowed by it with additional review. In other words, we get to take a peek at it and see if it's far enough out, noise considerations in that as a part of the review process before it moves forward. In the transitional surface, which is adjacent to the approach, it was just considered non-compatible, period. So we have areas where you can identify, have residential here, but you just move across the line and it's not allowed. It's considered non-compatible. So I do think we need to amend our ordinances and bring that forward and provide for those uses to be additional review similarly to the approach zone. So that we're kind of dealing with apples and apples out here, because you can imagine if you can have residential here and then say no over here. I would also point out that, you know, we did use our airport consultants as we developed these plans, and that conversation was had. It's just an amendment to the zoning code that I think we need to move forward with. So I'd like to get some action from the council on Thursday, just motion directing us to proceed with that amendment. And then there's obviously a process that we go through, and we'll evaluate it in more detail as we move it forward. But before this project moves forward, I think we need to ensure that that ordinance is in alignment with our planning. So I know there's a lot to take in with that.
Grant and then Steve.
So, Tom, you know, maybe what I'm going to comment on here, and I was a little surprised here just the other or last week, our airport committee didn't have a stronger reaction to having a glimpse of this development relative to that retention basin. And I think you and I had talked about the notion of a wet basin versus a dry basin. And the dry basin would periodically fill up and then drain away over some period of time. So I'll be very interested to hear what Mr. Cyril has to say relative to appropriate guidance from the FAA on wildlife control. I just want to maybe comment that I'm going to bias myself to a very conservative position, and that is that unless there is something that absolutely contravenes doing so, I really want us to consider dry basins. But I'm willing to be convinced to the contrary relative to the FAA guidance that might be appropriate here. And I don't necessarily, I'm trying to take a long-term view on this because I'm just going to make an assumption, whether that proves out over the next 20 years or not, instead of having essentially, private small class aircraft that we might at some future date be having the opportunity to bring in, small business jets. And so the question really is what approach now gives us the greatest latitude in the future? And so, but I'm willing to, be convinced one way or another and informed by the information from Mr. Cyril.
Steve?
Yeah, I would also echo Grant's comment to make sure we do get some of the advice you're talking about getting from our airport consultant. So I think that to me is extremely important considering this. And also to make sure we're also clearly understanding when we talk about a wet basin, as he's proposing, that is essentially wet all the time versus a dry one, water comes in, water goes out. I mean, the other thing I don't have any confidence in is if anybody says, well, we have a plan in place to control the waterfowl or to control the geese, just have them get hold of Nick and ask him about the pond behind his house. Doesn't happen. I have not seen one pond yet with in a larger area like that is successful. So if you want to talk about that aspect of it, I would have zero confidence in that as a way to counteract the wet part. So I think now is the time to be reacting to this in probably the most safe manner that's appropriate. And so I think our getting the response back from Jerry Searle is extremely important. So
And I don't disagree with that. You know, one of the, we've had conversations about this and as well. There are basins directly south and directly east that have been developed. Medco has their basin just south of 151. And so it's an additional basin. We do have obligations to maintain stormwater management, and we've done that throughout the community. And, you know, that's something that's also to consider if we do one basin opposed to multiple basins and throughout this area. So you know, there's other conflicting information as well as it relates to how we develop, and we try to move to regional basins because you know, you don't have all these ponds that we maintain opposed. So there's a number of different ways that we'll have to look at it. But we'll
he's
certainly-
designing this in the manner that if this were anywhere else, he's designing this with that wet basin in the manner that we think is appropriate.
Yeah.
And the best way to design it. So
yeah,
we understand why he's doing it.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, he's getting a little bit close to the
yeah. And to his credit, that's why he's bringing it forward.
And I'm glad he's doing it
Yeah.
now and everybody's discussing it now
Absolutely.
instead of later.
Yep.
City Manager Waller.
Thank you, Mayor. Just for clarification, RPZ stands for Runway Protection Zone. So we've heard, we got to explain the acronym. So there you have it.
Thank you. Okay, Colette.
Wait, that was it. I was thinking you were going to speak longer. I wasn't quite ready. So we got it. RPZ. This is somewhat related, but the idea, right, that we would have a wet basin certainly doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I'm with these two gentlemen here. Also, though, a comment you had made, and I just had an experience with this weekend. So that's why it's a little fresh in my mind. I was out of town, and this idea of developing in this area, and if we do have an increase in traffic out there, how that's going to create some maybe frustrations for the folks that live in that area 10, 15 years from now. Maybe, you know, we don't care because we're not really maybe responsible for that, right? As I think about us up here, I'm not sure. But, you know, how do you balance that, right? And that continuing to develop, and a great place to develop. But if we're thinking about, you know, continuing to grow our airport, and suddenly 10 years from now, we've got a line of residents standing here that are really frustrated with us because of the noise of the increase of traffic out there at the airport. So I don't have the answer. I just think it's important for us to sort of, you know, put it out and not try to avoid it at this point, because it will become a challenge for our community.
Thank you. Will.
So I just want to clarify some of the stuff you said to make sure I'm understanding correctly. So the retention pond or the wet basin. So the only issue is that it goes into the blue area in that corner.
So per the zoning overlay or the zoning ordinance, it is considered a compatible use in the horizontal surface, which is everything outside of the approach, transitional, and RPC. And that was a statement that was made in a part of the zoning. We talked about that. Under additional review, we would have to provide additional review for every basin within the horizontal surface, which is almost, I'm going to say, a third of the city.
Oh.
So it was, we put it as compatible. Just so happens that the first one is directly
Right there,
adjacent
okay.
to the approach.
Gotcha. Okay.
So
that makes
there
more
was a
sense
conscious
then.
decision made, and I believe if you go back, it was highlighted that decision was being made. So that's where that sits. But again, allowed or not allowed per the zoning, the developer has said, hey, I know this has been talked about. I just want assurances moving forward that there's a position that this is going to be supported or not.
So the developer wants to do a wet basin so that it's a recreational area for the development, correct?
Yeah, the developers proposed a greenway. There's a lot of other conversations going on with this development. If you recall, up on the northwest side of this development, there's a school
Alright.
property.
Yeah.
So
There are already some ponds.
that's a school
Maybe they're dry.
right there, an elementary school site. It's just outside of the approach. The approach probably actually touches the area. There's a parkland and there's some ground dedicated for water, a water tower. And so the water department's looking at that for usage. I know Seth and his board have looked at this project. One of the things that's going on is there's the way the land actually lies, a portion of the development would go into the property that's owned by the city. So as we walk down this road, there'll be a conversation about land trade for improvements, which the park board looked at, and it's not, we're talking very small pieces of property. They've looked at it and they seem to be supportive of it. We bring this forward with the preliminary plat as it moves. But so there's a lot of activity out here. We're talking over 100 acres of development. So it's a major preliminary plat. These are just two of the items that are the biggest item that I think the developer's concerned about. I can tell you that there's going to be conversations on the commercial side of this. That's closer to 151. It's commercial development property. So I would expect to see, that project or that property moving forward with development as well in the near future.
So back to the basins, so Rookwood Estates, the first edition, are those all dry up there? The basins that they already have, or isn't there already a wet basin up there to the north?
Mike, do you know that? There's one in this vicinity that's not in great shape. And I can't remember if the other one's wet or dry.
Was
Well,
that?
that's the other
I
thing.
guess
And
that was-
Marion's got such a high water table, even the ones that are supposed to be dry are primarily
So
wet.
you had mentioned too, the blue area about residential. So you were saying, residential could not be built within the blue area?
No.
Did you say
no,
that?
No,
Okay.
it's allowing, if you look at the note. That seems rude when I highlight it for you, doesn't it? That's not what my intent was. Well, it's right there. It should, I think it says 1 to 2 acre densities per unit or per acre. I'll have to look it up myself. Can you see that?
In the blue zone.
Yeah. I can't read it. It does allow residential. It's a lower density though. Similar
were
to
you
the approach.
saying-
There is allowance for development north of the section line, and there it is similar. It's a low density.
Where were you saying that you crossed the line and you couldn't do residential, or you could do residential? I was confused on that.
Oh my gosh. This was just handed to me tonight and I apologize.
You're advancing slides now.
What? I give up.
Can you go back a slide?
Take over, Carol.
That's why she said not push that button, right? So the blue area identified,
There's this line right here.
The red line that turns to
I'm
blue.
tracing the line. It's really light.
Yeah.
so if you look at this slide, if you look at the drawing to the left, the blue areas allow for 2-family and single-family housing.
Right.
And some of that is in the transitional zone, which currently in our zoning does not allow for that development.
In the red. No? Okay. We'll talk after, explain it to me, because I'm confused.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the thing I look at with this wet basin is, if I'm the developer, I'm gonna want to do it because I've got a lot of houses that would butt up to it and add value to those lots. So to me, that's gonna be an attractive thing from a development standpoint, but it's also the size of this. This is a pretty large wet basin. So, when I looked at the detail of that, then and the number of houses that are around this, I mean, that's a pretty large wet basin. So the number, so that's still a concern I have. Even if he cuts off that little tip on the east side.
Yeah.
Is fine. It's all out of the RPZ, but you still have a pretty large amount of water sitting there right next to it. And so anyway, so I'll rely upon, our consultant's expert recommendation, because I'm not an expert, but I'm just looking at it from, a layman's picture. So.
But you're gonna come back to us with more information.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think I had heard
Okay.
before the meeting that there were
Sarah,
some
and
concerns,
then-
but
And then Will has, or Grant has another question, right? Okay, Sarah, go ahead.
Okay, this is kind of what Colette was talking about too, but with the noise, first of all, I look at the pictures of what they're proposing for this type of neighborhood, and I think it's really great. I mean, I like it. It's a multi-tiered. It's what we've talked about in the past of how you could live your entire adult life in a neighborhood like this, because you can transition up, down based on age and what you like, what we have been looking to do. So absolutely love that. The school's going to go in and the people are going to follow. So I appreciate whenever that happens that we're looking at all of this, because I think we know if you put a school in there, the neighborhood builds, and it'd be nice to have a little direction on how we want that to go instead of being reactionary. So I appreciate you looking at that, or us looking at this. I'll say I just happened to be going by one of the basins this afternoon, the one north of Irish Drive, just as the school was getting out on an early release. And the mom in me was taken back when I watched a young woman walk out onto the ice while her friends took pictures, and it was like an adult, it was like the real life version of like breaking the ice. They were testing the water. And I'm just thinking, okay, who stops this one besides someone yelling, "Get off the ice"? What are you thinking? Because the whole other part of it was empty. So now I see these basins in a whole nother view of what can happen when you're in a neighborhood by a school and everything else. But I know we have them elsewhere. There's the one, isn't there the one north, or it's west of Oak Ridge, Echo Hill space, northwest of there in that neighborhood? Is there a wet basin in that one?
yeah, there's
On Albernet there on the curve.
there's
on the
multiple wet
curve,
basins.
yeah.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, that's one of the, we just brought a policy about encouraging
It's actually part of the strategic plan to go to more wet
wet basins.
Okay, so that's a good reminder for all of us as far as so we're not whipsawing
Yeah.
people all over and
Oh, yeah.
what we need to do. Okay, so anyway, and then I guess it's really up to the developer when we're talking about what Claire was talking about, when we're having these conversations, or the buyer that we're not hearing about, not just the traffic, but the air traffic. After people buy there and then they go, "Oh, this is a lot louder than I thought it was going to be." And then suddenly we're hearing about people not appreciating that coming on afterward because they maybe weren't out there at a Saturday afternoon or whenever there's a lot of traffic. So I guess it's just communication, but appreciate the research. Huh?
That's why they need a realtor.
That's why they need a realtor. Well, yep. And so I appreciate us putting this together, because like say, if it comes through what it looks to be, it's a really well thought plan of what it could be.
And we walked down this road with the stakeholders. The city departments were involved. Our consultants were involved. So this wasn't just developed in-house and thrown out there. So there was a concerted effort on how this came together and the plan that was put together. And you can see it was reflecting, and we did it with knowledge of the airport in conjunction with consultants. So
I guess that's my question. So like, why is it such a big issue now? If we've been through all of this conceptual planning, master planning the area, we were so proud of it. And it's the developer saying, "I just want to be sure it's okay." Because I assume all this happened with input from staff, knowledge of the staff, the consultants. We all looked at it at some point, not that long ago.
Yeah.
But he's just making sure that he's not going to get.
yeah,
pushed back later.
he's going to spend a lot of money developing the preliminary plat, and there's a very public process that happens for this. So he's
Okay.
just wanting to ensure that as he moves this forward, I mean, that there's conversations are had.
So if staff was part of the process of designing it this way with this
Mhm.
big wet basin, which I agree, I think is an attractive feature. I mean, I chose to build my house where I built it because of that pond there. I mean, it is something that doesn't exist a lot in our city. So I assume you're all okay with it.
Yeah, I mean, they're developing consistent with the land use plan. That's correct.
Mayor, if I
Brian,
can.
and then we'll go back. to
Yeah,
Grant,
just as staff is looking at it, I think one of the things, and I applaud Tom for this, is that part of the determination for this aspects of this plan are based on code or are purely on Tom's shoulders in terms of making a determination. And so as part of this process, Tom's wants to make sure that he's going out and he's also engaging the key stakeholders in the decision-making process so that the decision's not being just purely left with him, but also reaching out to our airport committee and the city council to get feedback. I think we heard some about making sure that we talk to Jerry, our airport consultant. We've had preliminary conversations with him already about this as a plan, so we have a sense of where he's at. But I think it really, Tom, I think you're being humble in that, really trying to check all the boxes to make sure that we're bringing everybody along in the process and that it's done in full transparency, but also we're flushing out some of the issues that others may see to help inform Tom's decision-making
And I
process.
think it's perfectly appropriate and it's great. I just was trying to put it in perspective of, because there seems to be a lot of, just sort of conversation about concerns and things and which is all legitimate, but I'm just trying to put it in perspective of how we got to this. So Grant.
Nothing now, Your
Oh,
Honor.
sorry.
I'll just wait until we hear from Mr. Cyril.
Okay, so what's the next step with this? You'll come back with more information and.
Mhm. Yep.
Okay, and Chad's gonna hold off on his
Yeah, I think.
site plan.
Yep, based
work
on this conversation, I would
until-
assume that he would.
Okay,
Real
one more
quick.
thing? Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Was he planning on starting that basin this year, this construction season?
They've submitted plans and he wants to ensure that as he moves forward, he's moving in the right direction. And if there's changes that need to be made, now's the time and not once he has a full plat developed.
Sure.
This is what his desire to move forward is. That's why he's presenting it in
Right,
this manner.
Yeah, so he's ready to go on it. Yeah, okay.
Anything else on that one?
No, that's fine.
Okay. Are we ready to move on? All right, the next item I will let the mayor pro tem handle.
All right, who's,
I got this one.
okay.
Once the slide changes. Internet's being slow right now.
It's the remote. It's messing it all up.
Russia's hacking us.
That could be that too.
All right, so we are talking about Marion Airport Road. So our airport is right here. There's the runway. The portion that is green is the existing HMA that we put out there already. So this is similar to Seacrest Road where we just went in there and put a fresh layer of asphalt on. And then the red section is an existing gravel road. And so there's a development up here for Aircom Park. And what we've done on some other developments that we're proposing to also do in this one is rather than go out here and put in 13-foot wide of PCC street and leave the other half as chip seal, to use that money that they would have spent to put in half a street and just put an asphalt overlay in to upgrade this. That way we don't go from asphalt to half concrete, half HMA to gravel. So we don't really have a set policy of how we go through this process, but this is staff's recommendation is to go forward with this, is to use that money, not building a concrete street and instead do an asphalt overlay. So staff just wants to bring council along and make sure everyone's okay with that. as we're moving forward with that.
Yeah, I drove out there today because I wasn't sure how much was gravel. I thought I drove on asphalt all the way past that driveway.
Yeah, it may not be
Not
exact.
as far as the gold shows to the east, but at least halfway past that driveway right there.
Yeah, it might not be exact, just general. That's what the plans aren't done yet. And so that's why we're bringing it to you ahead of time before the decision is being made so
Okay.
that you can be part of that decision.
Any other questions?
So unless there's any objections, that's how we're going to continue to proceed.
Okay.
That's it.
Thank you. On to
Okay,
item 3, and we'll hand it back to the mayor.
thank you. Chief Crable, you next?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. We had discussed that we're updating the contract between the Marion Township and the city of Marion. We found some interesting things in going back in history and trying to make sure that it's fair for both parties. This past week, I even gotten more information. So I just wanted to give you a little, since there were questions about the township, I'm going to do a little Township 101 real quick here. Right there is Lynn County and the townships that are in Lynn County. I probably won't need it.
That's dangerous.
Yeah, I'm terrified now. So in the center right there, you can see Marion West and Marion East. That is Marion Township. Why they were divided west and east, I'm not sure. Next slide. Maybe next slide. It just shows the difference between the Marion West and the Marion East. If you go to the county website, it shows both of them. And what's really interesting is when the slide finally comes up, it shows where all the cemeteries are. And I had told you before that they're responsible for the cemeteries and the fire service. Next slide. I'll try to hurry this for you, so. Nah, nope, next slide. Okay, the township trustees, we listed them there, and it shows their length of their service on the trustee board. But chapter 359 of the state code is the one that tells the township what they need to do, the taxes that they collect. They are appointed by the Board of Supervisors for Lynn County. So the Board of Supervisors is also involved in the budget process. But it does state in point 4.2, trustees shall provide fire protection. So how they do that, it's listed in the many ways they can do that. They can own their own fire station, their own fire trucks, or they can contract. Next slide. In going back, in 1960, it was interesting, we've had 28 fire calls out in the township, but we found no contract at that time for that. The Marion Fire Department did not respond on medicals until the 70s. So 72, it shows 29. In 1971, they purchased us a pumper and an engine. And the cost of that right there was $34,000. And you know what we paid for the last ones we just purchased. So where I'm going with this is that in the past, the township purchased a pumper, the city purchased a pumper. They put it in the station. We get a call to the city, we got in the city pumper. If the call was in the township, we got in the township pumper. So that's how it worked. Now we're building. We're getting to 3 stations. Things need to change. So hence why this is all coming to fruition. In 2014, the township agreed to purchase an engine, or actually replace one of their engines at the cost of $551,000. If you remember, the city also bought engine 93. So we bought them together so that we would have one for each station once station 3 is completed. The contract that they presently have was to purchased the equipment, the vehicles. They also paid for the personnel costs for every call we went on. They also paid for the repair costs of the engines that they owned. And then they paid for the repair costs of the equipment on the engines. So they actually bought the SCBAs that went on the township engines. Then the city bought the SCBAs that go on the city engine. So that's how it was split up in the past. Okay, next. We're on the next, okay. So in that contract, they also paid a fee each year. And that fee, I don't know how it was determined in the first place, but it was like $11,000. And it was determined that whatever the fire department budget went up the next budget year. So for instance, the fire department budget went up 0.25%. Then they would pay 0.25% more in that annual fee for the housing of the trucks and those things. They continued to purchase equipment. They have an asset replacement program, just like the city does. They still paid the equipment repair costs and the personnel costs. Next slide. So a change was needed. There was a decrease in calls. There was a decrease in land mass. In fact, last time I looked, the township was 74.4 square miles. Today, it's 72.88 because of the annexation by the city. The city's 18.01 square miles. But Robbins also is abutting up into Marion Township. So when the city of Robbins annexes, that also takes away from the township. But Robbins has their own fire department. So therefore, we're just providing for the township. But if you look at those numbers, you'll see where the calls had decreased. But in 2020, it went up drastically. Part of that was COVID and derecho. 25% of the calls, or 30%, in 2020 and 2021 were due to illegal burning of the debris from the derecho. So hence why the numbers went up. And then if we go by this year, we've only got 2 months of data, but it's showing that we'll have about 100 calls out into the township. So it's continuing to decrease, actually. Next slide. So in 2016, we kind of changed it. The cost was based on square mile rather than just this flat fee that they were paying for less land, less calls, but it was going up. So we decided to just base it on square miles to make it more fair. So it was $200 per square mile, and then each year they would pay $3 extra per square mile, and we'd see where that went. So that's where we are right now. They're still paying personnel costs and the repair costs. Next slide. So why we're looking at this now again is we can no longer, the township can no longer afford 3 engines, 1 for each station. It's not pertinent for us to actually have separate trucks to go to different calls. So back in, before I was chief, the township I showed in 2014 had purchased an engine. They purchased that engine that the city could use at all times. And that was their way of paying kind of the city for their part of the Station 3. And that deal was kind of made before I was chief. So we are presently in the city using one of their engines on all of our calls. And that's engine 92, which is right now stationed at Station 2. So the city owns 2 pumper engines, 91 and 93 at Station 1 and Station 3. But the county actually owns the engine that we respond from Station 2, okay? That engine is in bad shape and is in need of replacement. It's 23 years old. We try to keep them for 25 years, but it's difficult. It's not the same brand as our other engines. It really needs updated. And so the township agreed to purchase another engine. The issue is that new engine will be over $550,000. Actually, no, that was the last engine. The new engine will be over $700,000. So the costs to them keep going up and up and up, but yet the land mass and the number of calls is going down. So that's why we're looking for a new contract. And I just want to be transparent, make sure you understand why we're looking at this, to make it fair for both. If you look at the average yearly cost, because they were paying for equipment, they were paying for the repairs, they were paying for the personnel costs, they were averaging about $98,000 per year since 2000. And that averaged about 150 calls per year at $655 per call. Of those calls, 150 calls per year, probably 3, 4 were fires. The rest might be, we might have been canceled. They might have been false alarms. Most were medicals, but in the medical calls, the ambulance might reach there first. So they were actually paying for services that that we really didn't, but that's why I want to take a hard look at it and make sure that it's fair for both entities. But what might happen in this is that the city may have a higher cost. If they take over the engines and the repairs of those engines, I just want you to be aware that that might be a possibility. Do I have any questions? Do I have any more slides?
Questions? I mean, it seems like a very likely thing that our costs would go up, not possible. It seems most likely.
Yes. Yes.
Go ahead.
So is it possible then with what you described, that the township is going to be bringing in more money from taxation than they are really going to need to expend? If they don't use some of that for equipment?
No, actually, they're bringing in less because their population is decreasing as we annex.
Oh, okay, okay, for the annexation, then that's shrinking that as well. People
Correct.
living less coming in. Okay, I'm not looking at their numbers. I'm just
Yes.
looking at the math of it. And so that what's coming in is also shrinking for them.
Well, buying this new engine was really important for this third station.
Yeah.
So they agreed to do that for us so that we have another engine, because really as a city, we couldn't afford it at that time. They really stepped up for us. They also have given more money than you can imagine. When we had the UTV from the grant from Firehouse Subs, they paid for all the equipment for that UTV. They also own the brush truck that we use, and they will be replacing that too when it comes due in the asset replacement. So they do put a lot of money towards our department.
Okay. Any other questions?
So when I come back, I'll come back with some options for those contracts, and
Okay.
wanted to make you aware. Okay,
Thank you, Chief.
thank you.
Hotel motel grant program discussion. Right.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is a follow-up item that was discussed or brought to your attention at the budget work session. So this is, the purpose of this is to look at revising the hotel motel policy for the upcoming fiscal year 23. Not major changes, but we're looking to try to streamline the process. So the existing policy was put into place March of 2017. And so a quick review of what the hotel motel policy is that we receive funds from the hotel motel tax, which is at 7% right now for hotel motel stays. And per state code, we are required to spend at least 50%, or we can spend 50% on that, of that money on facilities to do with recreation, cultural events. And then the other 50% can be spent on any lawful purpose. We as a city in the past have chosen to spend nearly 100% on events and the promotion and encouragement of tourists and convention. So Next slide, Tara, please. So a recap on the revenue growth that the hotel motel fund has seen before we get into the direction for the changes in the policy. So as you can see, it was fairly steady until the new hotel opened. So that was in June of 2019. So just before the start of fiscal year 20. So you can see the growth there. Our revenue stream has increased quite substantially. Even with COVID, we still saw an increase in the revenues. So budgeted for fiscal year 22, we're at $300,000 and we're actually trending over $300,000 as of present. So next slide, Tom. So with this, we're kind of thinking around the direction that we're looking to revise the policy. The main part is how the allocation of the dollars is determined. So in the next slides, we'll get to the detail of that. But the three things that we're looking for direction is the allocation of the dollars in conjunction with the grant program. Do we want to consider a biannual program like Cedar Rapids does? We currently do an annual grant program. And then just have a revisit of the composition of the hotel motel review committee. Next slide. So currently our hotel motel grant program is open to nonprofit organizations and to what we deem local government events and commissions. Now, what we've seen and the feedback from staff is that it's slightly inefficient for our own departments, our parks department, to have to go through the whole application process to give their reasons to, 15 pages of why they should be putting on their events and, like music under the moon or music at the park. So as we grow and as a hotel motel fund grows, we'd like to streamline the process. So as the money grows, there's possibly more flexibility for council and less administrative burden on the staff. So the hotel motel review committee that meets in the policy now, they actually have to stick to a range. So that range is that they have to take the requested dollars from the program and they have to say, okay, they're fixed to allocate between 25% and 50% to local government. And then between 50 and 75% to nonprofit organizations. So what we would propose is that this local government agency and Marion partners who council can decide, that would be at the budget and that would be determined in the budget process. And that would be allocated via, so direct allocation transfers in from general fund, that kind of thing, depending on where those dollars are spent. And then the grant program would be exclusively for nonprofits. So that's all that the review committee has to look at. And it's kind of more apples to apples. I mean, right now they're trying to determine, okay, is this event more important than our local government event that the parks are doing? And it's a really hard process. So this would hopefully simplify things. So the budget right now, with the revenue growth, we would expect in our budget for fiscal year 23, we're still allocating $175,000 for the grant program. Now that would be only exclusively open to the nonprofit organizations. So to give you context before, so last year, we actually originally in the budget, we had allocated 175 for all, for our programs and for the nonprofits. So this would actually be an increase in the possible funds that the nonprofits could apply for. So that's the first direction. Do we want to go through all the directions before questions? I think we'll do that.
So,
okay. So this is just for some visibility here. Sorry, this is still the first direction, but this kind of gives you a snapshot last year's awards. So this kind of shows you, this is the local government section. So this kind of shows you that it's pretty much all our events with the exception of Cedar Rapids Tourism. That's the feature in their annual publication that we have a page spread, or sorry, several page spread. So that would be the types of events that would be allocated at the budget time in the hotel motel fund that would not have to go through the grant program. Now that is open, I mean, council to requests that we get. I know that there has been some times when things have come up and the suggestion of being, can we use hotel motel funds for those items? Well, that's the sort of thing where this would come into play and you would be able to allocate in the budget certain items that does not have to go through the grant process. So this is a snapshot of that from last year. So the next slide, Terrell. So the next slide shows the nonprofit breakdown here. So you'll see that for this kind of fiscal year that we just went through, 224,000 from nonprofits was requested, and then we allocated 157,500. So these are the types of organizations that would be applying exclusively as for the grant program on their own. So next slide. So the next question that we're looking for direction on, and we could stick, it's purely up to council whether they want to explore this, is that the annual versus biannual. Currently, Cedar Rapids, their grant program is only open to nonprofits. But then you have Cedar Falls, theirs is run by a third party that's not run by the city, and the same with Waterloo. So they run it on an annual basis, but the city doesn't run it. It's run by their, I think it's Experience Waterloo or the tourism office. So currently we do it annually. But the question is, do we want to switch to biannual? Some of the things I pointed out here, less administration for staff and the organizations. They could rely on the stability of multi-year funding. But then what do you do with the people who just realize that they want to apply and then they have to wait for 2 years? But so things to think about. Next slide. So then the other thing in the policy right now, it loosely spells out what the makeup of the committee is. And so right now, it doesn't specify any numbers of the makeup of the committee. It just says that it's made up of staff, council, and council appointed citizens. So we're looking for, are we okay with that wording? Do we want to keep it kind of loose? Do we want to have more structure around the appointment of members? Do we want to define the composition more in the policy? Are we okay with, like right now, there's 7 members. The current makeup, 3 staff, 1 council, 3 citizens. I think that's what it's been for the last 2 or maybe 3 years. So again, the policy doesn't define numbers. I'm just thoughts around the composition, and do we need more in the policy around that and more structure around the composition of the committee? So just one more note is that our application process normally opens at the start of April, goes through, is open for a month, and then we generally allocate June time ready for the start of the next fiscal year. So my hope is that it's not major changes, and I think you are aware of some of that potential for change before. So I'm hoping if we can get a draft in front of you for approval at the next council meeting, the second one in March. So,
Okay.
is there any questions around the direction? It's
Questions, and then we'll have you walk us through the items that you want direction on, but
Yep.
questions first?
Can we go back to the direction slide?
Go ahead, Sarah.
I just want to clarify. So there's the pool, but when you're talking about shaving out the city that would be part of the budget, are you saying we're allocating part of that already to the budget to be determined as part of our budget? Are you saying it's completely, there's absolutely no city application into these funds?
So there would be no city application process during the grant program. That would be exclusively for nonprofit organizations. And then the city events, they would submit during budget time, like the Parks Department, during their budget process, they would submit during the budget for hotel motel.
So we would
dollars.
allocate a portion of the total to city use, regardless of process. We're taking a city section and a nonprofit section,
Yes, correct. Yes.
kind of dividing that up.
And other Marion partners. So it doesn't have to be strictly
non-city
like a
partner.
city event, but yes, it could be a partner that, like the Winter Lights is in there, for example. So it could be something like that that's already allocated in there. So, but that and the city and then the nonprofit grant program would be separate.
Okay, so when we talk about a process, this, on the city side, when we talk about, you talk about maybe exploring, it's 2-year processes instead of 1. The city wouldn't be a part of that. That would be strictly on the grant side of it.
Correct.
Okay. And then, which I'm a little iffy on that. I'm probably be talked one way or the other, but I don't like, I'm a little hesitant in locking up funds for things that may come up, especially in our community, that far in advance. Maybe there's a way to have a 3-tiered thing. I don't know, where you have a separate group that's a pop-up, but 2-year awards as well. Maybe there's compromise. But I would just want to clarify. Okay, so I think that's it. I'm walking back in my head, these different processes. And I also would like staff feedback on this has been, they prefer this method over, as you said, having to go through this grant process
Yes.
application. And
Yes,
and this is our application we wrote, right?
this is our process, not a third, but yeah.
There's
So
no
we
state
administer. No.
mandate on the applications that nonprofits
No,
are going through.
The
This is on
only, yep,
us.
the only state requirements is that we do the 50-50.
Okay,
But we actually choose, and this would still, even with this change, it would still pretty much allocate all of hotel motel towards tourism related activities and events and programs. We're not changing that. I mean, but we could take 50% and say, we're going to spend it over here, which is not related to tourism, but we're not doing that currently. But with the future growth, it's an I mean, like council has to decide probably as the hotel motel fund grows, how do we want to continue to spend those dollars?
and are any of the awards right now a partnership between the city and a nonprofit application, or are they all one or the other?
So when you say, are they a partnership with the city?
Right, are any of those applications a joint, a chamber and parks department or whatever, I mean, are there, in any of those cases,
Oh.
would that have to fall on the city side of it or on the grant side of it? Because in seeing the application, it was a public-private type of event or,
I mean, generally not. I mean, the chamber do apply for the nonprofit part, and we are partners with the chamber on things, but generally the events are kind of separate and they're not the city events that are in the grant program as proposed in the new, so the nonprofits are separate from the city events. Sorry.
thank you.
The allocation to the city portion during budgeting process, it would still be allocated based on specific projects, correct? I
Yes.
mean, it's not,
it would
well,
be.
here Parks Department, here's a,
No, parks
pot of
would,
money.
yeah. So
It's-
parks,
it's for specific projects that are funded through budgeting.
correct.
Okay,
Parks would be specifying in their budget what events, what the amount is. We don't just allocate parks, that's the amount.
okay, so, okay, that makes sense. Colette, go ahead.
I think hopefully 2 quick questions. First question is do we carry these funds over? Do we have to spend them in the same, all of them in the same year?
So we don't by state code, so our policy is that the grant program needs to be spent.
Okay,
We don't have to spend fiscal year 22 money in a certain time period.
Okay.
By the next year, but our grant program states that the grant funds must be must be requested and distributed in the same, in the same fiscal year.
Okay, makes sense. Second question is, so you talked about the committee membership and wanting to perhaps shore that up a little bit, maybe make it more official. Or that's one of the things you're wanting direction on, I guess. I'm just making sure I
Yes.
understand that.
Yes, so
what you're asking.
in your packet was the hotel motel policy as it's currently stated. And it says, to quote, a committee consisting of city staff, council, city council representatives and council appointed citizens review the applications, determine recommended funding and make recommendations. So it's fine. I mean, that's okay. I just wanted to kind of highlight to see if council had any thoughts. Did they want to specifically say it has to be a minimum of this number? It has to be a minimum of one council member or a range. So if they wanted to input a range, I don't really have an opinion on that. I just wanted to put it out there to make sure the council, are they okay with that wording and the flexibility there, or do they have an opinion around it needs to be like less staff or more, you know?
Sure, I understand that. Thank
Yeah.
you. Is it
I don't know if Ryan has-
similar to, I guess I wanted to make sure I understood what the ask was. So then my question is for that, is this similar to other committees or is it different, right? When I think about the other committees and membership of those committees, are we more specific in the way in which we've written the membership? Or are we more general like we are with this
That's-
one?
yeah,
So
that's
trying to sort of understand if we need to, sort of standardize, right, how we are
Yeah.
noting committee membership in our documentation. So I think that would be helpful,
Okay.
right, for giving you direction is knowing what this is like in those other
For the comparisons,
committees.
yeah,
So,
Councilwoman, most of the committees or commissions that are appointed to are going to be dictated by code. This was one that came up as part of the budget process that when we were looking, and I believe it was actually your question that said, hey, what is this? What's the history with this? When we looked at the names of the folks that were on there, there was some turnover. There's some folks not associated with our organization anymore. And really having some clarity around the makeup of the group. Just recalling from memory, even the roster of the folks that were on that, it was very staff heavy. So with something like this, that's a benefit to the community, it's a question for the council. Do you really want to have staff making those decisions, or do you want to really kind of reach out and designate some key stakeholders? More specificity in something like a policy and establishing the number of membership is a good thing. It helps provide clarity. It helps us keep track of it better and have better dialogue with the council members as we go through that.
perfect, thank you.
And I just want to add to what Ryan just said, that if you do include staff, it would be super beneficial to include specifically which staff member, like the position.
Hey, Steve, and then, well,
So I'm going to focus in on the efficiency part. I mean, that caught my eye or ear. So my comments are on the direct allocation versus nonprofit, in support of that, to reduce all the paperwork that is unnecessary, to save further time, to be more efficient. On the annual versus biannual, I like the biannual for two reasons. One, it allows other entities to budget ahead of time, I think, which is good. But I like the biannual only if we don't spend and allocate all of the money. So I like to keep a certain amount or percentage unused so that if something comes up during that year, we have some money available to use during that year if there's a special project that is new or really important that the city council thinks we should be spending some of this money on. I like to have some of that in reserve. No opinion on the committee.
oh, well, and then Grant.
I will give my opinion too. I like the switching it to do direct allocation. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, direct allocation and the committee. I would kind of what Sarah said to leave it as an annual thing. Because it sounds like it'll stay the same for whoever's doing it in your department, it sounds like, but other city departments, it sounds like it'll be less work because they won't have to be filling out the applications. So actually it would save some time in other departments too. And then when you say composition, I think maybe it might be good to get more citizens on the committee than just 3, and maybe only 1 staff. Probably your deputy, whoever that's going to be, or whatever the title is going to be. Or go
If
ahead.
you want them to be a voting member, I would say city council maybe might consider it being either a Parks and Rec staff that is involved in events, or even our rec coordinator, or even Amber Communications. Just to weigh in on the benefit of our staff in finance are not really going to be able to tell you what drives traffic
Sure.
to events like
Sure.
they would be able to.
I would say to keep someone from council on the committee also. 1 council member. I think that's all.
So I think I'm pretty similar in my thoughts compared to Steve. I think that was direct allocation gives, it brings it into the budgeting process, if I understand right, for at least our core activities. I like the biannual partly because it just takes effort out of the total cycle of activity and gives some consistency. And I think the idea of having or holding in reserve some money to accommodate emergent requests that are just completely unpredictable is a solid way to go. I agree with Will's comment about trying to get more community involvement in this because I mean, really, that's a value proposition. It's for the community. So I think some additional representation. I don't have any other opinions about how staff or council would be allocated.
So if it was biannual,
So biannual would be the grant program would, you'd open it up, like say in April, and you would run over 2
Right.
fiscal years.
it's
that
approved
they would
for
be
the
applying
next 2
for.
fiscal years. Which, I mean, makes some sense for the organizations or the projects, knowing what they're gonna get so they can plan. But would you pay it out right away for the 2 years or every year?
It
I
would be
mean,
paid.
programs do go under, or they, for whatever, or if,
I would
organizations
suggest
go
that we
under.
would pay it out still every year.
Okay, so it wouldn't be
But they
paid
would make the
until the actual
request
year
each-
that it's gonna be used.
Yep.
Okay, well, I think that would be important. Composition, I'm kind of on the fence of whether or not it should be. I'm all for the public participation. My worry is that you get people with pet projects. That, if it was a majority of people, it wasn't council and staff, the majority of the committee, you might, that's just what is going through my mind. You get people that have pet projects that they want to promote. So I don't know, I'm kind of on the fence on that of making it a majority non-staff and council. But other than that, I'm fine with the direct allocation. So we can go through, did everybody make their comments? We can go through and just kind of get a sense of where everybody stands. So on the first one, is there anyone opposed to direct allocation for the city's portion? Anyone opposed to that? Is that good?
Yep.
Okay. Second one, annual versus biannual. Anyone opposed to biannual? You are. 2, 3. So it's, well, and we don't know where Randy would stand, but yes.
And I think there's a compromise, like, I hate to see and I come from this background, so I feel in the heart of people who have to fill out these applications. Because I'm there every year, every day of my life, on other grant programs. I know there are some that are, and I don't know how you peel this off, that are just, they're givens. We are going to allocate funds to this event. It's a key part of our culture, and we need them to succeed. So I totally understand that, you know, I hate to put them through paperwork just to put them through paperwork when we know they're going to get an allocation because it's a key part of our environment. It's the other ones. That's where I'm struggling because there are things that come up. I don't want it to, and I hate to have somebody look back and think, I don't want to try this because it's going to be 3 years, it's 2 years, we don't get this, then it doesn't happen for a couple more years or people getting comfortable with it. So I think that's, and like I say, maybe it's a 3-tiered piece to it. I don't like busy work, but I hate locking up those funds.
Okay.
So that's my big question on
And
that.
just to say, Cedar Rapids is a biannual. I actually couldn't find any other city that I did my research on that had a biannual program. But it was
I
just
think
not-
if we had to err, you know, I'd rather err on the side of keeping it annual. But, Seth?
So I do want to state, you know, one of the biggest events that go through Iowa is RAGBRAI. So if it was biannual, you could have it on a out year. That would require a lot of hotel motel funding for it.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and another thing too with that is if with the city being on an annual budget, what if something changed and the budget for the hotel motel went down 1 year and it was already allocated, or God forbid, one of the hotels burned down and then you're not even getting any funds. And then so you don't have the funds anymore, but you already allocated it out. So that would be a concern if the
It would be
the
stated,
process
yeah.
would go down or the money would go down type of thing, or up too. I mean, if it went up dramatically for some reason and then there was more to allocate and then you're already done for 2 years. I don't know.
So
Annual. Is that the feeling?
I think it's annual.
Okay.
Anybody feel strongly that it should be biannual? I mean, are you okay with annual?
I am.
Okay.
I think there are advantages on the other points that we've already talked about. We'll get some traction, some positive traction that way, and maybe some ideas will emerge about returning to biannual at a later date.
Yeah, it's not gonna be set in stone forever. It can always be changed. Okay. All right, on the composition of the committee, what? You had another comment or?
No, go ahead.
Oh, no,
I
go
was
ahead.
getting ready to answer your question. Mayor.
Answer my question. That's what I was hoping.
So I think maybe I heard what you said, and I think that's a good point. But maybe, you know, and I like for us to be more specific on the makeup of the committee based on the information you had provided. So maybe it's 2 staff members, 1 city council, and 3 citizens or residents rather. It seems like that might be, it answers right the idea of a few more. When we think about the weight of it, right? Residents versus who's on
agree,
there,
and
so.
Council members represent the community. So I think that's a good kind of compromise. Ryan, did you have something to add?
Yeah, Councilwoman, did you say 2, 3, 1?
Yep, 2, 3, 1 or 2, 1, 3.
That would just get us 6. So you'd want to make sure you'd have an odd number just in case of a tie, unless you make the staff non-voting, but that would still leave you with an even number.
So if to have 7, I would have 4 residents, 1 city council, and 2 staff then.
Okay.
Good point to have an odd
Just
number.
one quick question as it relates to residents. Would there be, and we haven't talked about this aspect of it, but would it preclude any board or commission members? Just thinking about the Parks and Rec Board. If there's as a resident.
I mean, I don't know that you'd have that as a rule, but it certainly would probably be a consideration in appointing them. I think if there's going to be some sort of a conflict or. Yeah.
Okay.
So then we would still have a majority of residents.
Mhm.
Okay, which doesn't take care of my concern.
But if we're appointing them, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And I mean, we're appointing them, that helps, I think, right? As we think about.
It's probably not an issue.
Yeah.
And I like the idea of the communications manager being the staff person for that. I think that,
And just to say that Amber has been serving on the committee for several years now.
yeah.
She's done a great job.
Sarah.
Can we put a trigger in here for review? Like, can we put this in here and say in 5 or 6 years or whatever, we're gonna look, we're making a few changes, let's see what happens, and we're gonna bring this back for review? I know.
Yes, yes, we can do that. I think organically, this is something that the fund is going to grow and grow and grow, and like with another hotel, it's so, yes, so that we can do that, yeah, for sure.
I'm very sorry. I have to go to a visitation for a family member, so I have to go. So, Will, it's all yours.
I'm in control. Yeah. Anything else? Any other comments? Any other questions from staff?
I think we have
No. Okay,
what we need.
great. Then we'll move
Thank you
on
for your
to,
time.
thank you. Move on to, where are we at? 5?
Last,
Yes, last one.
last but not least, yes. And I'd have an entirely different presentation for you if I knew we had a special clicky toy over there. No, I'm good. I'm good. So another action item that came out of the budget session in January was to make traction on our compensation program. Step 1 in doing that is creating a meaningful list of comparators to benchmark ourselves against relative to, in particular, compensation and benefits. So we partnered with Holly Corkery and came up with this list that's in front of you. Primarily, population was considered, but we also considered proximity to Marion, obviously, as they're in our backyard. So you can see the list that we prepared. We did share this with council subcommittee. Originally, we had Hiawatha, West Des Moines, and I don't have my glasses on, Coralville. And they suggested we separate them out, but still kind of keep them on our radar as key comparables for this. So that's kind of where we stand. You can see the list just relative to population and employee size. Again, this is step 1. It's a starting point for us when we look at benchmarking and again, tracking and making sure where we're at relative to market competitiveness. So prior to putting this through for resolution, we wanted to just see if anyone had any concerns or question on the list.
Go ahead.
Just have a couple of questions. So it seems like quite a range from 20,000 to 230,000. And when I think of comparables, right, like there's something there that's comparable, either population or number of employees per population. And then we pulled West Des Moines out, which seems to be right close. So if you could talk through that a little bit more, I think that'd be helpful just to understand how we put comparables together.
We're going to tag team this item. So
Right.
Councilwoman, I'll respond to that. When we talk about the comparables, and the reason we partner with Holly Corkery, who's our labor counsel, is to look at it. We have the practical, but then we also have the legal. So the practical becomes those that we compete against for talent. So that's why you would see the range with the population base. So Cedar Rapids, Lynn County, they're in our backyard. That's who we compete against for police, fire, you name it. Then you have the population size, and that's where you get to the legal. So if we ever have to go to arbitration, the arbitrator is going to look at the population range, normally 10 up, 10 down from the population base. So we're here, they're going to look at the communities that are 10 above us and 10 below us in terms of population. So really try to bring those two components together within a document. It helps inform, because we're not just competing. We're not necessarily competing against some of those like a Bettendorf, but we would be held to a Bettendorf standard if we went to arbitration. As it relates to West Des Moines and Coralville, specifically, the subcommittee had indicated to us that West Des Moines and Coralville they're going to be a little bit different in their when you look at their tax base. So their property tax base. Coralville is a lot of shopping malls, a lot of West Des Moines, a lot more industrial or commercial. So they're able to pay more based on how the property tax formula is, how the state rollback goes. So 90% for commercial compared to we're more residential. But it was still something that we needed to keep an eye on and be aware of and factor that in as we all work on considering where do we fall, where should we fall when it comes to compensation benefits or, you know, permit fines and permit fees and other things that have a financial impact for our community.
If I heard accurately, the criteria that were used were population size, right? 10 up, 10 down, but it's more than that, right? But population size, clearly in the state of Iowa, which you didn't comment, but obviously, right? We looked at sort of their taxing and what their tax base was. And what was the fourth one, right? There were sort of four that I heard you talk about. So population, tax base, what was the other one? Oh, and right there in our backyard. So we would be competing for talent and then in the state of Iowa. So those would be the four criteria that were sort of used in determining this list.
That's correct.
So we're outside that 10 up and 10 down. Why? So can you talk through that a little bit? Why we would have went outside that 10 up and 10 down from a population perspective?
Just, can you clarify your question? I'm
So
sorry.
I think what you were saying is, right, Marion is at 41,000.
Correct.
So they would look at communities that were between 31,000 and 51,000.
No, 10 communities up.
Okay,
10
thank you.
communities down. So
I
it's
was
really
thinking
kind of making it more manageable.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you.
The other thing that we looked at, Colette, is people that we have lost or communities that we've lost people to, and Lynn County is one of those. The other thing on this list is, this is obviously just public sector. We will need to be considering private sector too. We've got several positions and departments that can vacillate between back and forth between the two. So we would be remiss if we weren't considering, you know, other employers in this area. So, yep. I'm going to go to the next slide really quick, Terrell, if you could. So, oh, sorry.
Maybe you'll get to this, and if so, just answer when you get there. I'm curious, do you have an idea, are we gonna review this on an annual basis? Every other year? What's sort of the frequency at which we're gonna calibrate this?
Yeah, this is something that would be reviewed on an annual basis as part of a policy. This is something that we would anticipate as we talked about revamping the budget process and the budget calendar, reviewing financial policies and data like comparables would be something done on an annual basis, because that's going to help inform your decisions as we get further into the budget process. And I think Kirsten's going to hit on the next slide why that's relevant.
Yeah, and this is not for tonight to worry about, but once we have that list of comparators established, the hard part is determining what our comp philosophy is. And this is a very, very oversimplified way to put it, but there's essentially three. You need to determine essentially whether you're going to lead, lag, or match the market. That's where we ultimately need to get to. Once we have all the data of what our key comparables are, then we can start making those decisions. It doesn't have to be a unilateral decision. There may be times where it makes sense to match the market, but gosh, if we've got, you know, police and fire, you know, then we need to look at other options. So again, it's data that helps us make our decisions when we're talking about building out this framework.
So if I think about that, it could be our strategy could be situationally informed year in and year out.
Yes.
Okay.
And this is a living, breathing process. It's very fluid relative to what the market is doing. And I don't need to tell anybody that the market is hot right now and the war on talent is alive and well. So I've never seen anything like this in 27 years, frankly. So.
Okay. Other questions?
Feedback, how does this look? Is this something that the council will be comfortable? This would be the first step. Once we get approved, then that helps guide the next step in our compensation review analysis. That's as part of our strat plan that HR would be doing, evaluating the different positions and ranges and whatnot. So.
Go ahead.
Does this also include, as we look at when we're looking at comparables, and I see here, like, we're gonna lead, like, whatever, you know, match, that I immediately think salary.
Correct.
But there's a compensation package that's a lot bigger than that when you're talking about comparisons to benefits, insurance, retirements, all that goes along with that. So does that become new person here? Does that become part of this as well? Or are we strictly looking at, when you're talking about competition, salary?
This would be
levels?
total. This would,
This is
you know,
total.
as we look at, I mean, having this set, now it gives us clear direction of who do we look at. So we want to find out what health insurance programs look at. Here's our list of comparables. This is who we're going to reach out to, find out what they have. What are their premiums? What kind of design do they have? What are the employee contributions? When we look at the salaries for pick a position, you know, yeah, I mean, it can even bleed over into things like, what do we charge for building permits? And how do we fall in there? And it just helps us. It helps us all have a much more informed discussion, and gives a lot more clarity as to why and why we do what we do and the importance of it.
Follow up then, and maybe it was on the bottom of the other slide.
You want to go back?
I know there is a reason to only look at Iowa because sometimes the rules are different outside of, but should there be a separate kind of, oh, by the way, bucket over here that's comparable regional communities outside of Midwestern communities? I mean, do we compare to Madison? I mean, that's a university town. We're not. Is there anything with that that I just think, do we lose talent people? When I look about economic development, we're not competing just in Iowa, we're competing with neighboring states across the river. So I know it isn't direct as we listed, but should there be kind of like the bottom box? Who do we see ourselves similar to in Wisconsin, Minnesota? Or bigger in Rochester, Minnesota? Are we?
You're never going to get too much data, if I may, right? I mean,
Right, I know,
you're-
and I don't,
you're
and it doesn't
spot
have
on.
to be like huge, but I just think sometimes, I hate to think we just limit ourselves to Iowa, because I don't think people limit themselves to just Iowa, and I want to know where that's going to be. And again, it could be a little box of 3, maybe it's pick 3 comparables. You all probably know who your peers are when you look nationally at who you deal with.
Yep. So 2 things. One is we just implemented an HRIS system, and that will allow us to really track exiting employees. And we will be able to build data, and then we'll be able to come up with those well, where are people going if they're leaving the state of Iowa? Now, having said that, the majority of people that have left since I've been here a year and 4 months have stayed within the state of Iowa. But to your point is incredibly well taken, that yes, we should track where and why people are leaving for sure.
Right, and if we're looking at, this is, truth be told, if I'm reading what you're saying, Ryan, our comparable cities list, this can be broader than just staffing. If you're saying if we're pulling what we're charging for building permits or anything else, our comparable cities list is in reference broader than just staffing HR. It could be
Correct.
used in
Yeah.
park, well, what are the square miles of parks in a community? What does the fire department look like in another community? So it's in then that case, I would think we want to look at ourselves as part of a region, and is our developer that we're right up here, you know, is from an hour away. Well, if you go much more than 2 hours, we're in Illinois on that side or whatever else. So I think we're working with people that are from all over, and maybe we should just have an idea of who we look at. Again, it can be a little box. It doesn't have to be a long list that causes a lot of work to get done.
What if we took the 2 hour and just found a 2 hour radius around us, and we can kind of spot check it and see? And
You all are the experts. You deal with
Yeah.
your peers and I mean, we don't have to reinvent wheels on that sense. You know what your best practices are from other areas, what people are doing.
yeah, and I mean, just right off the top of my head, I'm familiar with Dubuque. Dubuque does a lot of, when they do comparables, this is more specifically to their city manager, but their city manager will go out and will seek out comparables from Illinois, from Minnesota, from Wisconsin, from Michigan, and from Iowa. So they do try to get a larger net, but it's a little bit different because it's just for that specific position. But that's, I mean, certainly we can take a look at it, and if there's anything that jumps out at us, we can certainly put it in that below box as FYI.
Right, and I only use Madison because I think it's everybody 4 lanes. We're always shocked to think that I can get to Madison in the same amount of time I can get to Des Moines these days.
And as we
so-
review year over year too, when we start collecting that data with exiting employees, and we can
Yeah.
adjust as it makes sense.
Kind of see, but good job.
Anything else? Got what you need?
If everybody's good, what we'll do is we'll put this in a policy and bring it back to at a next city council meeting. Thank you.
Maybe one of the comparables out of state could be, Hilo, Hawaii or something. And if you need a council member to visit and validate that, I'll be happy to.
I would appreciate
Take a
some help
trip.
with the market research if you're available.
I think
So,
we're
yeah.
gonna have a rock, paper, scissors tournament to determine who goes to that one.
Mayor Pro Tem gets to trump everybody, so.
There you go. You got the gavel. Thank you all.
Yep, thank you. The meeting is over. Have a good evening.